All right, I'm going to call the Public Safety Building Committee meeting to order Monday, February 12th, 6 p.m. First order of business is discussion with the building commissioner regarding cursory building code review. So, as all of you saw in your meeting packet, the building commissioner did a preliminary cursory review of the plans with context. I believe it took place at some point last week. He issued a letter with some of his feedback for our design team, and I thought it was important enough, given the context of the letter, to at least invite him and also give context a chance to maybe respond to some of the feedback. So I guess before I open up for context, to just kind of give us their thoughts on that and maybe how we're going to rectify some of the concerns. I didn't know, I just want to make sure with the committee that everyone's level set and has read the document. Okay. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to just maybe address at a high level thoughts, path to resolution, and obviously the building commissioner's here, so we can have an active dialogue, and then any committee member can give you their feedback.
Sure. So we actually just were talking for the last 15 minutes in the corner of the room before you started. And I guess what I'd say is that I think both the building inspector and us are on the same page as to what we've been discussing, the various issues. I think, I won't speak for him necessarily, but my impression is that the town officials want to make sure the building is done right and is done well. I think he had certain concerns. He wanted to make sure we're heard. And I think that's probably why the language was chosen the way it was. From our perspective, obviously, we feel like the language was probably stronger than it needed to be, particularly because we felt like we had good rationale for all the choices we were making. And I think realistically, that's where we're at between us and the building inspector, is that we just need to continue the dialogue to make sure that we all are on the same page as to why we're making the certain choices. I'll also say that I think the types of issues we're talking about right now are not things that, if they did have to change, would be show-stopping type of changes. So I don't think this type of discussion is putting bid dates into jeopardy, but they will need to be discussed and sort of ground down over the next week or two. And that's our intention, is to have another meeting with the inspector and go over again where we're coming from, like I just did before this meeting, and hopefully, get all on the same page in the next week or so.
So, in your opinion, based on the feedback you've gotten to date, given that a significant chunk of our later portion of our meeting is going to relate to cost, are any of these items going to impact all the work that you're going to present to us in half an hour, an hour?
No, I think there's some slight potential cost increases, particularly when we talk about things like an ANSEL system at the fire department. It's a fire protection system for the stove. That may add a little bit of extra cost, but I think overall, in terms of the project dollars, we're not talking about things that would be outside of this cost estimate. When we do look at it, you'll see there's still a little bit left over for design contingency to pick up these sorts of things anyways. So we are still reserving enough in the budget to handle small things that happen like this. So I feel confident we'll be okay. So
your path between now and bid documents going out in 2 weeks?
Couple of weeks, yeah.
What sort of I know you maybe don't have dates, but is your plan to resolve all of these things before the documents go out?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, the plan is to meet with whoever we need to meet with, as much as we need to meet with them, to be able to get on the same page. And that may mean we are able to prevail upon them to change their opinions so that they can feel comfortable in where we're pitching this project and how it relates to the code and other items. And part of it might be that we change our items to match their interpretations. So then there might be some sort of meeting in the middle as well. So as long as we get all on the same page before bid, that's our intention. So we'll do whatever it takes.
Okay. Mr. Robideau, I first thank you for coming on short notice. Obviously, you wrote that letter, I believe it was Thursday, and I contacted you, and appreciate you making time. Any comments you think we should be aware of as a committee, or any concerns that you'd like to raise other than what's addressed in the letter that we should be taking under advisement?
No, I spoke at length with Jeff before the meeting, and I think we're on the same page now. We'll get together and hammer it out and get it all squared away.
Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, one question I have, Jeff, is town is obviously incredibly fortunate to have Mr. Robideau on board in terms of his professionalism, and on the second page of his letter, the second to last paragraph, the second sentence, he talks about an attempt to cut corners on life safety as not being one of the enumerated areas for, I guess, the discussion to take place. Did you talk to him at all about that concern, and will that concern be addressed before we go out to bid next week?
I did talk to him about my concern. I expressed that I felt that that particular language was uncalled for and unwarranted based upon what we had sort of put together in the sort of initial meeting as when we initially met with him to go over this and the comments and discussion that was had there. I'd ask him to explain, I guess, why he chose those words, but I certainly would say we disagree with that. But like I said before, regardless of my feelings on the matter, I think that we will do our best to get to a meeting of the minds so that we're all comfortable with what's going forward to bid. I don't believe that, in fact, there's any cutting corners. I think it's simply just a matter of how we're interpreting the code at this point a little differently, and that happens in every project. And we just, before we go out to bid, we need to get to an interpretation we both can agree with.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, is there any reason why we're just starting these conversations now?
I think that there's a lot that we needed to nail down before we asked the building inspector to get into a set of plans. I mean, typically, the inspectors want to have enough material that they can actually follow, the bouncing ball all the way through the project and understand why certain decisions are being made. When you present too early, there's not a whole lot that they can do. We did have the building inspector part of a very early meeting, but there wasn't enough to really discuss at that point. We had it over at the fire department, and so we felt that we needed a design that had enough meat on the bones, essentially, for him to really get into it and respond with the way he would actually interpret it. Would it be presented to him for construction by the eventual GC, so that we could take any commentary and plug it in. So we usually wait until the design is final and the documents have enough description to be able to do that. So I think, would I like another extra couple weeks? Sure, of course, everybody would. But I think we have plenty of time to resolve it all.
Okay. Any other comments, feedback on that particular topic? Thank you for coming, Mark.
I'm sitting way over here, folks, because I'm sick.
Okay, it's a good place for you then.
Well, wait, it's gonna sit on John's lap, but
So next item on the agenda are 3 sets of meeting minutes. I'll take them one by one. The first one is December 19th, which Mr. Lyons sent in a separate email, separate from the packet. I'll just start with my comments. I don't have any issue with the amount of detail in here. I found it confusing, the back and forth that Ms. Cook and I had trying to reconcile our math, and maybe wanted to suggest potentially just saying that there was extensive conversation between the two members, and where we landed was my only suggestion. And then in the second bullet point, page 2, where we say that we were going to use $200,000 of the $2 million contingency funds, I just suggested putting the word approximately. And I found one typo. But other than that, those were my particular comments. I don't know if anyone else had any additional comments on those.
I just have one. I was listed as absent, but I'm also listed as providing an opinion. I believe I was there. I believe I was. I think so. Or late. Or late.
Came and left. There any other comments on those minutes? All right, so I will make a motion to approve those minutes with the edits that I suggested. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Officer, seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Goodney, Rooney are abstaining on that, otherwise it carries unanimously. Next, agenda items, January 8th. This was in your packet, submitted by Mr. Barry. Are there any comments, questions on these? I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for January 8th as appearing in the packet. Is there a second?
That's the first set of minutes on
Yes.
that date,
Yep,
correct?
in the stapled packet, yep.
Second.
All right, Mr. Officer, seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? All right, motion carries unanimous. One abstention, Mr. Lyons. The next one's January 31st in the packet.
Jason, there were two January 8th minutes.
When was the meeting with the planning board?
That's why I asked if you were just doing one of them.
Oh, it's, I guess it's a I viewed it as, it was one posted meeting.
I would have to abstain for the second one, though, because it appears that I'm not present at the second part of that meeting.
Yeah, because that was the one where we were at the
Right,
fire
right.
department, and then, all right, do you want me to, I'll split the motion
No,
up
you
then.
don't have to, just, I mean, to the extent that anyone has any questions, it's pretty clearly identified in here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you better split it.
Do you want, so do you want to do a motion to split it? Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. So I'm going to, even though we voted, we're going to withdraw that last motion. I'm going to make a motion to accept the meeting minutes as presented for the portion of the meeting at the fire department. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Officer, seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion, and then one abstention. Motion carries unanimously with Mr. Lyons abstaining. The next set of meeting minutes would be for the planning board session of that same meeting, where we lost a quorum at 8:45. I'll make a motion to accept those as presented. Is there a second? Mr. Barry seconds. Is there any further discussion on those? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Rooney, Cook, Lyons. All right, we're good with the 8th. Moving on to the 31st. Any comments on these? I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Goodney seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Any abstaining? Rooney, Officer Lyons, or the abstention, otherwise it carries unanimously. All right, so we are officially caught up on meeting minutes. Thank you to all who chipped in. Next item is chairman's update. Very quick update. It's probably pretty obvious based on some of the agenda items we're doing tonight, but planning approved the project at their second to last meeting. An order of conditions was presented to our design team. The design team reviewed them, town council reviewed them, and we're now within the 20-day appeal period, so the documents were filed with the town clerk. So once that happens, it goes to the Worcester County of Deeds, and those order conditions would then be submitted to any potential bidder of the project. For those that have not read the final version of the special conditions, there were some that, in my opinion, are completely unrelated to the public safety project, but were put in based on feedback from certain planning board members and abutters with an interest in preserving the golf course activities / wanting to see the conservation restriction advanced at, I'll call it a more rapid pace. The one that could potentially give the bidders a concern was the final language read along the lines of needing to submit the conservation restriction to the appropriate state agency. It originally read needing to be approved, two very different things. So after the planning board meeting, I sent a letter to the Board of Selectmen encouraging them to ensure that that process continues to move at a fluid pace, because what we're trying to avoid is should a bidder ask for additional information upon receipt of these conditions, the town would be able to say, well, that step has already been taken care of, so really it doesn't become a condition once it gets submitted. So just an item for everyone to be aware of. I'll continue to just monitor the status, because I don't think we want to handcuff our ability as a town to, in terms of getting the right bidders for the project and the right cost. Same is true for conservation. Those order of conditions have been submitted and approved, and they have gotten preliminary approval for the septic site design, and that is moving forward. So I think all the regulatory boards are happy with the progress. We obviously know that there's some work to do with the building department, and strongly encourage our design team to work in that respect over the next couple of weeks. Second item is there continues to be a significant amount of discussion at other committees and boards, mainly Board of Selectmen and Advisory, about the golf course articles that will likely appear at town meeting. While we don't own those articles, we indirectly do, because some of them will be funded through our bid package. Not necessarily funded by this group, we've been over that, but as we go through some of the items tonight, when we get into the cost estimate, I think it's important to understand where the golf committee stands. So it's my understanding, and Mr. Rooney, certainly correct me if my understanding is not correct, but that the golf course committee has received approval from the Board of Selectmen to seek from the CPC funding. They've submitted an application for funding for a retaining wall in parking lot to be used for a revised golf parking area. And there is a remaining amount of money, which I think we'll see later in our packet, that would need to go through some sort, they'd need to find funding for outside of CPC that wouldn't qualify for CPC. And it's also my understanding that, while it doesn't directly relate to our bid package, they are seeking funding from CPC related to the permanent redesign of the 1st and 9th holes. So I think that is moving forward in a way that will be able to give them the information they need to make whatever pitch they are or not going to make at town meeting. But I think it's important to understand that baseline, because I think there's some decisions we're going to have to make about alternates tonight that indirectly, it's probably more directly relates to all of that. The other thing is in your packet, and I don't really, unless someone really wants to go through it tonight, you did get a copy of a preliminary phasing of basically what it would look like to the golfers during the summer and into the fall, once construction has started and is underway. The goal of this is it's preliminary, and for purposes of discussion, we've scheduled that meeting for Tuesday the 20th at 7 p.m., so it's a week from tomorrow. It would be a joint meeting between our committee and the golf committee. Unless there's issues that are percolating from tonight's meeting, that would be the only agenda item that we would have. So that'll be 7 p.m. next Tuesday night here in this room. Any questions on that?
I have a quick question for Jeff and John. What are we doing in our documents for the GCs to be held to anything for phasing related to the golf course and everything?
We'll have phasing drawings in the document set, so that there'll also be a specification section detailing and outlining the schedule and the phasing requirements. And so it will specifically say where they're allowed to be, where they're not allowed to be, how the traffic flow will work, that sort of thing.
Okay, so everything that we're preliminarily going
Yeah,
through.
no, it's going to be really important that the people who bid on this project understand the full scope of limitations or opportunities that exist.
And duration of construction's in there as well.
Yeah, in fact, I think that the duration that's mentioned, Ellen, correct me if I'm wrong, is it mid-April, roughly? But the turnover from phase one, the septic system coming online, I think it's mid-August.
Mid-August.
Yeah, that's listed in
8/15.
there. So they basically give them a drop dead date as to when it has to be online and functioning and completely accepted by the town.
Right, okay.
We have to be ready for school to start.
That was my only question.
Any questions on any of that?
Time is the meeting with the golf course committee?
7 PM
Thank you.
next Tuesday. All right. That is all I had from our chairman's update. We have invoices for approval, so if you remember the format we started a couple meetings ago, we're going to approve Vertex invoices individually, and then Vertex will submit one package for all other vendors for our approval. So we have two Vertex invoices in this package. Before we vote on each one, I just wanted to call the committee's attention to the last page. It summarizes where they're at from their fee perspective in terms of a time and materials perspective. So I guess we'll start with the invoice dated December 12th, and it is for the total amount of $18,685. Are there any questions for Mr. Lemieux on that one? I'll make a motion to approve the invoice as presented by Vertex dated December 12th, 2017. Is there a second? Mr. Goodney seconds. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next is Vertex invoices dated January 22nd, 2017. 18. For $6,673.75. Are there any questions on this one? Ms. Cook?
Just a general question. John, do you think that we're on budget as far as the whole $130,000? You think we're under?
Yeah.
Okay. It looks like we are, but, okay.
But as you're aware, the level of work in the last 4 or 5 weeks,
It was a lot.
yeah, the invoices are going up, but I still think we're gonna make.
5 minutes per is all you get, though.
It's kind of, there were 115 of them.
It's really the
Okay.
reference checks that take so long.
The 700 reference check emails that went out between the two firms. But yes, under budget.
Okay.
Any further questions on that one? So I'll make a motion to approve that invoice as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Goodney. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The third one is a package with a total amount of $164,144.63, made up of 3 invoices, mainly from Context Architecture, but one from Fuss and O'Neill related to their review for the planning board, and one from VHB, which I believe it says conservation, but I believe they were the traffic team, if I remember correctly. Yeah, they were the traffic team. So my plan is to make a motion to approve as presented for the total amount, but I guess are there any questions for Mr. Lemieux on, or if it specifically relates to context?
I have a slight question for Jeff, I guess. Did we account for all the other, the planning board and the code analysis review that are gonna come up, all these other third-party reviews? As far as, I mean, that's not under you.
Well, so that's Fuss and O'Neill.
Yeah, that's gonna be my question here, is we're starting to pick up other invoices here that I guess weren't under the building, in my opinion, at this point. Because Fuss and O'Neill was for the planning boards.
Right.
Yeah,
we
but if
knew
you
we
were,
were
if
gonna
you were
pay
a
for it.
developer, you would have had to pay that. It's part of the process. So there is a line in our budget for
That's what I'm asking, do we
items like
have?
that. But that's a question for John, not Jeff. Because
Well,
Jeff didn't have a choice in who to use.
No. I mean, is there a line that specifically says those fees?
What did we hold, or is
No.
that coming out of contingency?
No, because there's you know, there's a couple of A&E line items for allowance for additional fees or reimbursable expenses. There is money there to cover those.
Right.
As of right now.
'Cause we also used up
You used up a chunk of
you used up a chunk, yeah.
we used up 44,000 of the 77,500 for extra services
Yeah.
for context already. But, you know, we're talking about $4,000 and $5,000 increments, and hopefully, after next month, jobs to
stop.
bid,
Yeah.
anything that's out there will catch up and
Yeah,
we should be square.
because we don't get a ton of those throughout construction
No.
of other,
No, what you're gonna get through
regulatory.
construction is construction testing, third-party testing services.
Which we
that
do
are
have a line
required,
for.
Which we established, we had a line item for and we upped it,
Yep.
so,
So the 44-1 includes these?
no,
So we add those onto the 44-1?
correct. The 44-1 so far is just for context. What I'm saying is that that line item has capacity to take some of these items.
some cushion.
And that's where you're gonna put it, line 9?
I think so, yeah.
That's where it's gonna come from.
Yeah, well, you know,
I'm-
there's a bigger discussion about the budget later, you know. Do we want to start creating line items to track these things, for which I will fund out of the contingency or out of another line item, so that they're more easily tracked?
Right.
As opposed to squeezing them all into a line, where then you have to go, wait a minute, what do we put in there?
Second.
And my notes section will get quite long at the bottom of the budget.
But
saying
aren't
that's
we
what this
almost
is for.
done with this, as far as that type of expense?
Yeah, but that line was also meant if something else comes up for context along the way, to have some cushion there too. So it's all one, you know, it's 22, 6, 29, 500. How we split it into buckets, you know, we can have 30 sub-buckets if you want to help track these things. But it's a good question.
I just, I would like to be able to track it so we know
Well,
what's getting,
that's
what's
why,
swelling.
that's why
yeah.
we are doing, if someone were to question how funds were spent on this project at the end of the day, there's gonna be a track. If someone wanted to painlessly go through every single minutes and packets, they can do it, right? And I think that's what Mr. Lemieux's job is in working with the town accountant,
gonna
is to
get-
summarize it.
Budgets
Right.
in a couple items, I actually have that, that's a question. And the two things I handed out will address,
Yep.
will address that.
I mean, my simple view on some of these items are, yes, it may not specifically tie to something Jeff had in the budget that we presented, but you wouldn't have a planning board approval if they didn't have third-party review. If
And
we
I
didn't do
think
the traffic study,
That's
we'd
the
have a
other,
traffic light.
that's the exact point I wanted to make, is that oftentimes at the beginning, when we're conceptualizing the project, the need for a traffic study is not necessarily apparent yet. You know, in many towns that actually have traffic studies as part of a site plan review written into the requirements, they often will waive them when it's public safety, because the amount of volume of traffic is known to be very low. And so the intent is not to burden the applicant with additional work. So, you know, I think it's probably reasonable to say, as Jason's saying, but on the other hand, it quite also possibly could have been waived as well, and you wouldn't have had the cost. So you never really know early on where you're gonna spend the money. So you gotta build in some areas where it's gonna come out of.
I just, to the question of the contingency or the buckets that we've kind of already
Correct.
laid out.
Correct. So right now, what I'm doing is you'll see on the expenditure sheet.
Why don't we wait till the end
Wait
for
till the
that? Yeah. Is there any questions on these particular invoices?
The only question I have is, again, it's a small point, but
Mike?
small point, but when you're going through these, I assume you're looking at them with an eye towards what Jason mentioned about someone wanting to go through the bills and make sure all dots are dotted. I see there's one that we're being charged for parking for a planning board meeting here, and I don't recall there being meetings out in our parking lot here, but again, it's a small item. I'm not sure why they're charging us parking fees to come out here, but, again, it's just something to keep an eye on moving forward.
John, that one may be actually in the items that we haven't approved yet, the out of
Oh,
scope. It
okay.
looks like it's on the CBA Landscape
Yeah.
Architects.
I'm sorry.
All right, any further questions on this? I'll make a motion to approve the invoices listed in the Vertex letter dated January 31st, 2018, in the amount of $164,144.63. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Goodney. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Next item, out-of-scope request from Context Architecture. So in your packet, I was forwarded an email from Mr. Lemieux that came from Mr. Shaw. I'm going to do my best to frame it, and then I'll ask Mr. Shaw if he has anything to add before the committee poses any questions. So we're all very well aware that there was an extensive planning and conservation process. I received an email via Mr. Lemieux requesting payment for basically two things, and waiving payment but informing us that they're not going to charge us. So one was from Howard Stein Hudson, which is the civil that works as a subcontractor of Context Architecture. The request there was for a sum of $28,000 of fees that are not currently being carried in the architectural and engineering line. They also asked for an additional $4,000 for Context Architecture themselves to cover time at the planning and conservation meetings. And then they agreed to waive a out-of-scope from CBA Landscape Architects for $590, which related to additional meetings. I'll start, because I've been digging on this one since I got it, which I've had it for a couple of weeks, but I've been trying to get more detail for the committee to make an informed decision. And what I have learned to date through coordination with Mr. Lemieux is, I guess, let's start with the context fees. So I don't know, Jeff, if you want to outline, basically make a case for the 4,000, then I think we're gonna have to go through the Howard Stein piece, I think.
Sure. Yep.
In chunks.
Yeah, I would say that on our perspective, just to get the TBA thing out of the way, we're fine with paying them for coming to an extra meeting. We assumed a certain number of meetings with them, but we felt we had the option to not bring them to one of our final meetings, just to sort of keep to our contract amount. And we felt it was important to have them there. I don't think Megan actually said anything at that hearing, but I think it was important for the entire team to be there. So, that's something we're willing to take off the table. The other piece that we're taking off the table is all the additional time spent on our end, sort of doing all of the weekly coordination meetings with the planning and conservation groups over the phone, and the follow-ups with the team to make sure that the documents got produced. And I think the biggest component of all of this, the time for the meetings was certainly in there, but the biggest component was the time spent in the office wrangling the document set, going back and forth with planning and conservation to make sure that they had everything they wanted. And I lost count of how many complete sets we ultimately did, but it was a lot. And the printing costs are certainly something, and most of that was with HSH, our civil engineering firm, but the time spent coordinating all of it is certainly a cost for us. We're gonna waive that as well. We've kind of considered that to be part of our responsibilities, sort of providing the sort of project management from the design team's perspective. But the one thing we do ask for consideration on, and that is simply just the time to attend the additional 2 hearings for both boards. I believe that's what it was in our proposal, so 2 in conservation, 2 in planning. And that's essentially just the time we spent going to the meetings and making the case for the project. And that was because at the beginning we assumed that it would be a two-meeting process for each board. We'd actually plugged it into our original schedule that way. And obviously as we got started into it, it looked like that was gonna go longer. We were hopeful that we could try to get it done in 3, and then it turned into a 4th hearing. So, I think at this point, we felt like that would seem reasonable, that the extra 2 would be compensated. But that's essentially, from our perspective, all we were looking for.
So you're looking for $4,000 to cover fees and
Right.
0 expended, because the printing is on the Howard Stein Hudson
Most of the
side.
printing is on them, yes. We did do some printing, but it's much smaller compared to what they spent.
So I guess contractually, I don't think there's any limit on the number of meetings, right, that you said you would attend?
Between the town and us, we did not set a limit, mainly because we felt like if we did set a limit, inevitably, we're gonna go over that, and inevitably, there's gonna be a conversation, and I didn't wanna have a discussion about, wow, that's one more meeting, so I'm charging you for that. You know, we've had plenty of meetings on this job, and if we tried to count them, I think we'd be in trouble. So I felt like just sticking to the formal hearings was a good benchmark to use, since we kind of did figure out that we'd have 2 for each. And that's why I'm willing to kind of waive everything else.
Okay. So sticking just to context requests, and I won't do any motions until we get through the Howard Stein piece, but are there any questions for Mr. Shaw on his request for the 4,000? Mr. Officer?
Jeff, I'm looking at your letter or email. Am I correct that the amount you're asking for, the $4,000, is half the cost for the added meetings?
I think it is. I remember writing that, but let me see if I can pull it up, unless you have it in front of you, John.
Well, you say in here, I would like to propose that CTX be compensated at half our cost for the added meetings, which would be $4,000 for the 4 additional meetings.
Okay, yes. Yeah, no, that's exactly right, because Ellen and I attended all 4 meetings, so we were only going to charge you for half of that cost. I'd forgotten I read it. Thank you for bringing it up.
And cost is your normal billing rates, hourly billing rates.
Yeah.
So as I understand it then, if you were not eating any of that time, the cost for meetings would be $8,000.
Roughly, yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions on context-specific request? All right, so we're gonna move on to Howard Stein Hudson, which they are a subcontractor of Context. In asking for more details today, I literally got it like 2 hours before the meeting, so what I'll do is summarize, and Jeff and John, you're more than happy to correct me if I go awry here. But I personally felt that the letter that we received in our packet didn't give me enough detail to make an informed decision. So I was provided a copy of Howard Stein Hudson's engagement letter, essentially with Context Architecture. It's the first time we as a town have seen it. I don't really think we had any business seeing it because it doesn't really impact us. But very clearly in their letter, they had budgeted for, I believe, 2 planning and 2 conservation meetings. Again, town of Southborough doesn't really have any, we deal with Jeff, right, and Jeff subs it out. So that's the context, I think, no pun intended, right, of why they're asking for this,
Yep.
The main thing. So what I thought we should do is maybe go, there's 4 different items that they're requesting in here to sum to the 28,000. I thought it was probably easiest to go one by one, because it may yield different opinions, and then what I'll try to do is aggregate where we're at and move it forward from there. So the first item in summary was task 1. They're asking for an additional $15,500, which is basically related to additional effort for approval from the planning board, which included 5 rounds of peer review comments, full sets of plans and reports, et cetera. What I did learn is of that amount, $13,500 relates to fees, and $2,000 relates to additional, like, actual printed documentation. So my personal view, and maybe we can just take this off the table just with sort of a head nod now, is our planning board required them to do extra printing. I think it's a little archaic to have 16 printed copies for every submission, but they were doing what they had to do to get approval. So my personal view, well, I don't really think it's the right process. It's not our ball to call, and I think that we should kind of move the document printing off the table and kind of, if everyone's okay with putting that forward as a potential approval of out-of-scope fees.
Could I just ask one question? This 8 additional submissions, in your experience, is that an extraordinary number of submissions to go to a planning board for this type of project?
Yes.
Okay.
Weren't a lot of them due remember exactly what they were.
John, you're gonna need a mic.
You getting one behind you?
Thank you.
Contract now.
I attended the planning meetings, and if I remember correctly, there was a lot of inconsistencies on the documents submitted. I may be wrong, somebody else might be able to correct me on that. But I don't remember exactly what they were, but you'd have on page 1, 20 feet from the fire hydrant would have one widget. On page 17, you'd say it was 3 widgets and stuff like that. So do I think we should be responsible for those documents? Absolutely not. If there were inconsistencies due to typos and error. If they weren't, I mean, a few, yeah, but if that was why we had to come back to all these different hearings and things, then I disagree.
I would totally agree with you, if that's what it was. I wouldn't charge you for anything if we were coming back, because we made a whole bunch of
I know there was a lot of different
Um,
things that you had to change, but there was a lot of mistakes in there as well, am I
Well,
correct?
I think the issue at the beginning was that planning and conservation was not prepared for the speed at which we wanted to move, which meant that they were going to get documents that, you know, for all the intent that they said at the beginning, they wanted 100% final documents, and they stuck to it, really. They did stick to it. They wanted final biddable documents, and a typical planning and conservation process does not include final biddable documents, because if you think about where we are in the design process, we submitted this package in October, and here we are in February, just getting to the point where we actually have biddable documents. So we're actually submitting documents that will have a lot of inconsistencies and errors in them at the beginning to get the basic points across, which is, this is how we're going to apply the town's ordinance for conservation and planning board to this project in a broad stroke way, try to get them as complete as possible. So if we waited really till that was done, we wouldn't have been sitting here today. We'd have another 2 more months, 3 more months in front of us. So we wanted to increase the speed at which we went through their process to get to today, which inevitably meant that there was going to be some initial confusion, I think, on those 2 boards' part as to what the state of the documents would be in. And that was sort of the first round of comments that we got back, which was, you know, there's a lot of stuff here that isn't fully coordinated or maybe fully vetted out. And then the subsequent rounds, and those were all responded to, but the subsequent rounds had to do with timing of getting documents. We would go to one planning board meeting, we wouldn't get the peer reviewer comments back for 2 weeks. Then that would be on the eve of the next planning board meeting, we'd have to turn around really quickly a response to that, a new set of documents for the planning board, and then attend the planning board meeting where the results of the comments were discussed, and oftentimes in the time span that happened, the documents had already changed a little bit as well. And so what they wanted to see in those hearings was the exact set of documents given to the peer reviewer comments, and then sit down and have a meeting to discuss it. We didn't have the time to wait 2 or 3 weeks to sit on the documents to avoid that. So we continue to work on things, which meant the documents we were giving them at the next hearing had more work done, and that they had to correlate between what the reviewer said to what our document said, making this way too long-winded. But in the end, there was a lot of work spent to try to keep the speed up and keep us going through this process as quickly as possible. You know, it's possible if we had waited till the documents were 100% or close to it, we could have done it in maybe 2 hearings. But I think the reality is we didn't have the time to wait. The town didn't have the time to wait. The design process is, and that's fairly typical, I would say, that most projects we go through, the permitting process happens in the design development stage with documents at that level of completion, and the permitting ends up getting approved, you know, just about the time we're in construction documents or middle of construction documents, so that they timed correctly so we can go out to bid and we haven't spent any additional time on it. Just about every other place we've gone to, that's worked smoothly. This has been a little bit more challenging. So I would say that most of the work that we've done, and I think all of the things that we're asking for additional cost consideration is for the additional effort put forth to meet these requirements.
Can I just ask?
Yep.
Mr. Wood, is your concern about the printing, or are you more into the fees, or is it a combination? Okay. I just want to make sure.
just due to, if the report was done correctly, it would have only had been printed once or twice, not 10 times.
Okay, Mr. Rooney.
Yeah, the reason I asked my question a while ago was whether it was an inordinate number of times to go before the board, is it's been my experience that a vendor is very reluctant to send out this type of a letter looking for increased costs, and they only do it when they really feel they have to do it.
Right.
And if they didn't have, if in the industry, if this wasn't an expectation as to this amount of work to be done before the planning board, then you know what, I tend to fall in line with the vendor's concern, and you know what? You know, moving forward, we try to tighten it up, but in order for them to write this type of letter, it's clearly they were bleeding with this project.
Yeah.
And to get to this point, so and you know, maybe the expectations were different. So that's maybe that comes later when I make that soapbox, but that's kind of where I'm at on that,
Okay.
Jason.
So I guess I'm going to skip number 2, but, right, so the third item was they requested task 2 to be increased by $4,500, which related to additional conservation meetings. Jeff, I assume that's the same explanation,
Yeah,
just
s-
different
Ditto.
commission
yeah.
instead of board. My only comment was they're asking for $4,500, but then the email that they actually asked for the support on that does not actually tie to $4,500. It only
Yeah,
ties to
I know.
$4,000.
I know, I saw the same
Um,
thing.
So I'm just going to say this once, but I spent a lot of my own time trying to fix some of the typos that were going on in between. And the fact that I asked for this for a month. Now, I don't know delays between you two, but the fact that I asked for backup detail behind this and we can't even get detail that ties to this kind of proves the point of what the planning board was doing. I don't necessarily agree with everything that they dragged out in certain areas, but there were certainly typographical errors. I get it. This wasn't you writing this, but it speaks to,
Yeah, we were all not too pleased that it came out today. Frankly, if it hadn't been done when you did it, I'm not sure where we'd be at this point. Maybe it wouldn't be on the agenda, but I certainly was not pleased that it took so long
Okay.
to get it.
so
this point.
let's just say the committee was fully on board with supporting this as presented. Are we approving 4,000 or 4,500?
I would like you to approve what the detail says, frankly, if they're gonna give you, I always go by, the more detail you provide and the drawing specifications, that sort of thing, that's what the contractor has to go by. So if they give you a write-up of the actual hours and it's less than what they wanted to bill you on the letter, I go for the detail. So
Okay.
I'd advise you to pick those numbers.
Okay. So going back to item 2 in the scope letter, which is a new task called Task 8 for $4,000, where they prepared and submitted a stormwater pollution prevention plan. Was that not in scope?
No, in fact, that was a shock to everybody. The SWIP is usually prepared by the contractor. On most projects, it's prepared by the contractor. The design team will essentially do a erosion control document, which helps to guide the contractor, but preparing the SWIP is usually the contractor, and frankly, very unusual for the town to require prior to even having a contractor on board. And essentially what the SWIP is there for is to hold the person doing the work accountable to a plan. And if we're doing it before that person's even hired, it's a little premature. But I understand why they do it. It's just very unusual.
Okay.
It's something we would have had anyway, at some point along the.
Yeah, you would have
Along
had
the
to pay for it usually in the GC's price. It's just incorporated.
So John will show us that $4,000 savings.
Yeah, we
down
have to
the
make,
road.
we have to make sure we don't pay for it again.
What? Make sure we don't pay
We
for
have
it
to make sure we
twice.
don't get it
Yeah.
again.
John?
You gotta do something, John.
Well, we will, oh yeah, it'll be in the specs. We'll highlight it. We'll say, here in stars, you don't have to do this work.
Well, it's in the document set now.
It definitely will be in the document set, absolutely. It's a
Okay.
requirement.
Pay me now, pay me later.
Correct.
No SWIP.
All right, so then the last one was an additional $4,000 for actual meetings with planning and conservation, as well as the requested coordination meetings. that they provided detail that ties roughly to $4,000. The only thing I didn't really know was the breakdown between weekly coordination meetings, which I, in my personal opinion, view is that was something we, the town, asked for to get this thing moving, versus the additional actual planning and conservation meetings. That's a debate of whether those should have occurred or not, you know, whether it was our process as a town or whether it was your process in terms of the submissions.
I would say just based on the hours, that it looks like it was just for the actual hearings, not for the phone calls.
My personal view is I would have paid you for the phone calls, but not for the meetings, just.
That's what it says.
All right, so I guess what I'm gonna do now is, does anyone on the committee have any questions before we kind of deliberate where people stand on this to figure out the right way to motion this?
I've got one question.
Ms.
What was the
Cook.
amount of the contract that you signed with them to begin with?
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
70,400. Is that what you signed the contract on, or did you
That's the
negotiate that?
original contract, 70,400. There was some other things that, between us and them, that increased that amount, but that was the original contract.
They got some of the 25,000 that you increased it for the work on the golf course?
Yes,
Do you know how much?
I could look it up and
I'm just
tell
trying
you.
to see what 28 is percentage-wise of the contract. It's a lot.
It is a lot. I agree with you. I would say that when we first negotiated with HSH for the project at the beginning, after the original study was done, there was quite a bit of back and forth. We not that you need to know the details of how this came to be the number on the page, but that was not the first number that was submitted.
Have you worked with these guys before?
Yeah.
You like them?
Yeah, they're good.
I don't have any more questions.
Okay, are there any questions? So,
Gonna amend that amount?
well, I'll tell you where I stand. We can certainly amend that amount, but I'm not going for 27,500. I think we'll handle context fee separate. So where I stand on this is my view is I'll pay for the additional printing costs. I'll pay for the weekly meetings. And I'll pay for the SWIP, Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. There's too much sloppiness. I mean, we had a posted meeting on the 8th. Selectman Shea and I were sitting right about where Mr. Wood was, and we knew the planning chairman was gonna give the option for, do we extend the application or not? Mr. Shea is the executive standing in, because Mr. Purple wasn't there that night. We were sitting there and saying, do we call the ball on this or not? And we were left with no ammo to call the ball on because there was too much in way of changes. And I'm not talking about like the changes that occurred at the last meeting where there's maybe some, I'll call it refinements to legends, right? There was just inconsistency between documents. I cannot sit here and support that because what you all don't know is the amount of work that goes in to like make these meetings 2 to 3 hours and not, like the amount of times I talk to Mr. Lemieux, like on a weekly basis, just trying to make sure that all the balls and all the ducks are in a row. It's extensive and could have saved a lot of people's time. I'm sure we'll see it in some invoice at some point too, but that's kind of where I stand is I would support the SWIP and I'll do some math. How many coordination meetings do you think we had, Ellen? 8, 10, 5? 5? We went with 5? 5 at. You're talking about coordination meetings? When you would talk to Karina and Beth on the phone.
5 formal, but I was many times with James
But we're talking about James's time.
James is
We'll come back to
If you want to
context.
just do if you want to just do the formal conference calls that were scheduled, I think you're right. I think there was 5.
Okay. So we have the SWIP for 4. Materials, looks like it's about 20,
2,000.
2,000?
there was some materials in the other lines, but I'll call it 2,500 based on the detail that they provided. and call it another 1,000 for the weekly coordination meetings. That's where I'm personally at.
What's the
But
total?
Jason, are you going to make a motion that we just approve some of this and go back to them and say, this is all we're gonna pay?
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm at. I could be swayed.
Can we give them an opportunity to come in and explain this a little bit better? Or-
Unfortunately, they have a contract with Jaff.
Yeah, no, the way I look at this is not necessarily for you to pick and choose. I mean, I don't really like doing this, but I felt like because HSH's fees were so significant, I wanted to give the opportunity to see them sort of unvarnished. And the way I look at it is, you're the client, you have a contract with us, it's up to you whether you want to consider these. And I really term it as for your consideration. I'm not requiring you to pay any of this, it's consideration. And then whatever you don't pay is left up to me to hash out with HSH, and don't worry about it, it's off your plate.
But Jeff, did you know, I mean, when you're talking about a 40% increase over a contract, that's a lot.
Yes.
And so normally, you would think that if someone thinks that they're gonna start going over by 40%, they're gonna say something early on before they do it.
Yeah.
Once it's done, it's done.
Yeah, no, we had a conversation, I know, in December, as we were trying to wrap up everything in 2 hearings with HSH, I did, about their, how much printing costs are and how much time they're spending on printing. And, there was a lot of conversations about this, and I didn't feel, up until, I'd say mid-January, end of January, is about the first time I think I mentioned it to John as the possibility, because my feedback to HSH was, let's see what transpires throughout the rest of the process. Nobody's, I think, going to consider anything until the actual planning and conservation processes are complete. And, let's see what happens to see where you're at, to figure out how much to go forward with. And I didn't actually have any numbers in front of me until towards the end of January, after the second to last hearings. So, yeah, it's a big number, and that's the other reason I sort of bring it to you for consideration, because I know it's a big number, and it's up to us to kind of work it out internally.
Roughly a 35% increase from the original contract with
Yep.
them. That's huge.
Right, but
Not large, that's huge.
I do think I will stick up for them. I think there is one thing to keep in mind. We kept asking them to revise the site plan that our planning board and commission, suggested OneDrive. I mean, that takes time to go back, and there's a amount of trust that's missing there if you're saying, if they're trying to design as we're going.
Jeff, that wasn't the primary driver this time, was it?
We definitely spent one planning board meeting pretty much talking about driveways. Frankly, I think the fact that we're into 4 hearings probably had a lot to do with that driveway configuration. Even at the end, as you know,
It's still on.
it was still sort of essentially on the fence.
But I
a
guess
little
your
bit.
plan, if I look back, there was a significant amount of conversation, right? But it was all about the school traffic and, the design, what was actually being shown on the screen. Now, I know you had to come up with maybe a few sketches of alternatives, but the design that was always on the screen is still the same design that we presented at town meeting.
Yeah, I mean,
last year.
it was fortunate, well, for the most part it is. They did
I
tweak
get
it.
you mentioned
but
drainage.
I think we were fortunate, frankly, that we were able to get through that process without having to rip it up and start over again. I mean, they could have said, we're not approving this design. You have to start over. And I mean, they could have come back and said, you got to find another way to get a driveway on this site, because we don't want this double driveway whatsoever. I think there's a lot that could have happened. I think they were very reasonable people at the end of the day, which was great. But, I think there was quite a bit of concern in the design team that
But that didn't happen.
we're gonna work towards that. And every meeting that we went to, we had to prepare for that and potential to happen.
So what is your plan? Are you gonna go back to them and try to negotiate this? Are you going to
I
pay
don't,
it?
I don't have any money to negotiate with. So if you don't give them the money, they're not gonna get the money. I mean, that's the business that
Paid,
we're in.
paid until paid, right?
I
So
mean,
either we're
if-
gonna
if-
pay contacts and then you're trying to pay them. So whatever we decide to do, you're just going to. you're
Yeah, I
gonna
mean,
pay.
at the end of the day, will we make some sort of agreement internally? Potentially. I don't know the answer to that. I think realistically, I don't think you need to worry about it. I just always, in these situations, just ask, this is what the costs are, this is what they say the costs are. It's up for your consideration. If you have a different opinion, or you want to pay part of it or not all of it, I'm not going to fault you for one way or the other. I just want you to consider it, and I'll take it back to them, and then we'll resolve it internally.
Jason,
Just, sorry.
Did Vertex opine on their opinion on this bill?
No, we haven't, because,
Are you gonna?
because like Jason, we just got the backup. So,
David?
where do you come down on this? You were gonna tell us what your thoughts were.
Well, I mean, my rough math is $7,500 for the fees that were presented by Howard Stein Hudson, which is the SWIP, the printing costs, and the weekly meetings that we as a town requested. That's where I'm landing, because I think the only other option is if we wanted John to go back and think about this some more and come back to us a recommendation, you're looking at a recommendation in April, because that's really our next meeting unless we do it at the golf committee hearing next week.
Yeah, I don't see that math, and I'm no accountant.
He's taking, look, he's
So
taking
$4,000
this right there,
for the SWIP.
2,000 there, and then 1,500 for number 4.
And only $1,000.
Number 4 was 1,500.
$100 an hour.
Yeah, I know. That's okay. They're gonna hold, but still.
I don't know, Jason, I think that, that's pretty strict. I think they should get something from the first one. Not all of it, but something, besides the printing cost.
Mr. Rooney?
Jason, what I did, and I don't know if yours is a motion, and if it is, I'd like to amend that motion.
I
but
haven't made a motion yet. I'm
Okay.
just telling you where I'm
my
sitting, because
thought is that they're
I
looking.
don't want to be going back and forth
I
with
know, I know.
withdrawals.
My
and-
thought is they're looking for $28,000. 25, take 25% off of that for their lack of accuracy in preparing the documents, and it comes down to $21,000. It's a $7,000 hit. So the accuracy, which seems to be one of the major components of our concern, 25% hit of their fee is, to me, a significant hit. And it should be something that they would understand in $21,000 and be done with it. So I come a little richer than you do, Jason, on that.
Any other thoughts or commentary?
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that much inaccuracy caused that many meetings, though. And I think it's the meetings and the times and the turnaround.
So, Mike,
Two or
what do
three.
you think?
I mean, I was at 2 or 3. I just think that we bought, you bought 2 with them. You bought 2 with HSH and with the planning and commission, and you got unlimited, or you figured 2, right? So we figured 2. And the more that we stretch it out from there, it's just time. So it's like we're either asking for it or we're not. We're either willing to accept and take what the professionals that we're hiring to give us are putting in front of us, or we keep pushing back and keep asking for more meetings. So I agree. If you want to trim it some, and it's either all or nothing. Like Jeff could eat it all. He's already eating some of it, but he could eat it all because we bought this
He
with you.
said he's
and
not gonna eat any of it. You're
He's
going,
eating
they're
some.
gonna get
He's eating
paid
some
what we
already, and he
decide
could
to
eat the
pay.
rest of it.
I mean,
That's what I'm
I
saying.
mean,
I know, you're
That's
gonna
all
eat your
internal.
piece.
That's
It's
all
all
internal.
him.
No, I understand, you're gonna eat your piece, but you're not gonna eat any of this.
He could.
Depends on what HSH, I mean, that's all internal. It's between the
Good.
design team.
It depends on what we do. It's
All right,
pass-through. It's just, he's gonna pay them
Okay, so what do you
through
think we
this.
should pay?
I think we
You're in
should
this
pay him.
business.
Yeah, I think we should pay him. I mean, it's time. Again, it's, the town asked them to do this. And the town didn't say, we're gonna get this, the town didn't start out saying, we're gonna get through this in 2 meetings. The town said, do this, do this, do this, and it led to multiple meetings.
So let me just remind the committee, we had this discussion about the septic plan 3-4 months ago, right? We then went back and came up with an out-of-scope fee proposal, right? Which
25,000.
in general, 5,000 or less, Mr. Purple just has authorization to approve. 10,000, between 5 and 10, he would have had to at least get buy-in from myself as the designee from this committee. Greater than 10 comes before the committee, right? So clearly greater than 10. I'm a consultant for a living, so I understand what's like being on the other side of the table. And I agree with what Mr. Rooney said a little while ago, but it's really tough to go back and ask for this, and right, like, it's tough to just even present it, not to mention actually have to now sit here and go back and forth with us. I was completely caught off guard, and I'm just imploring the committee to consider the amount of extra time that people had to put in to get this over the finish line. We didn't ask Jeff to deal with the back and forth and the conservation restriction and the golf items and the stuff that clearly was not his, right? Like, the Board of Selectmen stepped up to the plate at the last planning board meeting and helped resolve some of those concerns, right? So, yes, were some of the comments belabored? Absolutely. But I have a tough time when I had to sit and listen to back and forth on weekly conference calls of fixing typos, and I don't know how many times, like, there was supposed to be hail bays and there was supposed to be straw bales, like, little things like that. It just detracts from the quality of work that maybe is actually going on. So that's why I'm, in particular, taking a hard stance, because I felt not only blindsided by this, but I thought I went above and beyond to come up with a policy that would outline this ahead of time instead of getting whacked on the back end. And I get the optics of not wanting to get this when we don't even have planning board approval, but there should have been a, hey, by the way, we entered into a subcontract for 2 meetings, and we're now beyond those 2 meetings, because would we have approached that January 8th planning board meeting a little differently and forced them to call the ball? Maybe, maybe not, but that would have knocked off at least half of these costs. Right. Am I missing something?
The only thing I would say in response to that, and what I asked Jeff, is that, was this an inordinate number of planning board meetings in your experience, given all the years you've been doing this? And your answer was absolutely. So, yeah, they probably, when they bid the job or they set their price, they had in mind 2 meetings, which turned into 8, and additional conservation. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah. But so John, going back to your days as a selectman, if you had been sitting here as one of the chief executives of the town on the January 8th planning board meeting, and they're waffling on whether they want to call the ball that night or ask for the applicant for an extension, and you're the applicant, and you're hearing at least 10, maybe 20 comments that are clearly just errors on the applicant's part, would you have had them call the ball, or would you have asked for an extension?
I would have done what was needed to make sure we ultimately got planning board approval. And if that required...
Mike.
I would have done what would have ultimately required planning board approval, because the objective at the end of the day is to get this done. So I'm not sure how I would answer that question, other than to say, listen, we need to get this project done. We need to make sure planning board is okay with this project. That's the objective. How do we get there?
And that's what was done that night, in my personal
Right.
opinion, is the planning board was probably going to deny the application.
Yeah, so
If-
I'm not saying I have any criticism as to the method in which the planning board went about its business. I was just saying in terms of the expectations coming into this project. This was an unexpected number of meetings that resulted, not necessarily wrong, but
Yeah.
it's
No,
just
that's fine.
unexpected.
All right, so I've heard one person in favor of the full 28. I've heard one in favor of a 25% haircut, so that would be 21. I have thrown out 7.5, so 7,500. Those are the 3 numbers that have been thrown out there. Is there a general direction that anyone's looking to go? And if so,
I think we should decide tonight, though, not April, because we've got to get these numbers finalized,
Yep.
so we really know what
I
we are.
agree.
So I think we should make a decision.
so
tonight.
those that haven't voiced an opinion, maybe you can certainly lean towards one of those 3 numbers. You can lean a 4th direction just to muddy the water. Maybe we can.
I have a question. Jeff, if you've got the plans and there were errors on them, typos, those kinds of things, were the plans redrawn to correct only those, or were there additional plans done to actually make design changes? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, throughout the planning board and conservation process, there were a number of reviews that sort of exposed errors and inconsistencies in the documents, as well as probably more substantial commentary on the actual design. So both were really done. It wasn't simply just fixing errors. It was also responding to design commentary, engineering commentary, and that sort of thing. I think throughout all 4 hearings.
So I would add that I'm much closer to John Rooney than you, Jason, sorry. As we know, they'll be happy with 75%. They won't be happy with 25%. And even if they had said, oh, by the way, before the 3rd meeting, we only put 2, I'm not sure it would have changed a whole lot. And this is a complicated project. The golf course has made it really complicated, so I don't expect perfection. We all make mistakes and things. So I think they should have a haircut, but more along what Mr. Rooney has suggested than your draconian 75%.
I'm willing to go to 50, but I'm not.
No, that's why there's more than one person.
Are you willing to go to 50%?
I'm willing to go as high as a 50% haircut, but no greater.
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with that.
I'm willing to go with 50% as well. Due to the rush and everything, the mistakes are going to happen, but that's definitely, there's more work that's been involved in this.
Are you saying 50% on the total bill or the 50% on the,
I'm saying
For
50%
40%.
on Howard Stein Hudson.
just on, but on their total bill or the time spent? Because.
I'm saying
printing,
50%
Swift.
of 27,500 because we've determined that they had a math error on their invoice.
I was,
I'd second that. That's a motion.
So I will make a motion to approve the Howard Stein Hudson portion of the out-of-scope fees for 50% of the amount as amended of 27,500.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Rooney. Is there any further discussion on that? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? We got 1 opposed and no one abstained, right? All right, so now we got to deal with Jeff's $4,000. Any views, motions on the $4,000? You didn't provide any detail other than to tell us it was really 8 and it should have been,
Oh.
and you knocked it down to 4, right? Going back to that part?
Correct.
I thought that was the slightly easier part of the conversation.
4,000 for 2 meetings for 2 people, $1,000 a person per meeting sounds extremely
No.
reasonable.
Plus
Oh,
the
okay.
weekly
No.
calls, right?
I was going to say, it's actually 4 meetings, 2 people at 4 meetings, so it's technically 8 meetings.
8-person meetings.
Yeah,
Eight
yeah,
person.
yeah. 8-person meeting, that's a good way to look at it. But in any event, it's $4,000. However you want to look at it.
Are there any thoughts on that one?
Sounds like a deal.
Haircuts built in.
Okay, so we need a motion if you think that's a deal.
I make a motion to pay the $4,000 that was requested.
There's seconded by Mr. Wood. Is there any further discussion?
Briefly, in terms of future expectations or anticipations, is there a way that we can be assured, or we're not going to keep running into this as we go down as we get closer and closer to the end project here? I don't want you to have to come back every other meeting saying, listen,
I hate it. I don't want
No,
to
you
do it
don't.
again.
is there a way to avoid this moving forward?
I would love to. Obviously, I try to make you aware of anything as soon as it first comes up. I think we thought initially when this came up that it wouldn't be like this, and maybe we wouldn't even have to come back at all, which may have been our mistake for not coming back sooner. So yes, we will tell you as soon as we possibly know of anything that would affect additional scope work. But I will say that it's sort of in our nature to try and help our client out as much
Right.
as we can, and so we probably will start doing something for free for you at some point, and then, it depends on kind of how much, snow is in the snowball by the time we look up and say, oh my gosh, how much have we spent on this
I just don't
already?
want
So
you to have an expectation, and I'm sure you wouldn't, that, oh boy, these people are easy, we can just add another meeting and get another $2,000, which I know you won't do that, but again, I don't want to take this committee's time up every other
I-
meeting to
you-
talk about.
I'd rather put your money into the construction project. I would rather have a better project, nice, happy client, you know. That's gonna do more for me than $4,000, $5,000 in
So
change.
I would just strongly encourage you to, not that you're not on speed dial already, but we need to be proactive. We're being reactive, right? So we need to be proactive on these things going forward, because when we get into construction, it's not gonna be Jeff's fees for 5,000, 2,000, 3,000. It's gonna be a big ticket item. And we need to be proactive on this stuff, and we need to be catching it real time. And this committee has shown a willingness to meet whenever. We met the day after Christmas to deal with the Hardy Plank situation. So I'd rather be proactive, because it'll make these conversations probably a lot easier for all of us. So there is a motion on the table, $4,000 to Context for out-of-scope fees related to additional meetings. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right.
When you talk to HSH, you might say that you took a 50% haircut too.
I'll make them watch this.
Yeah. That's actually a good idea.
Send them the link.
Unvarnished,
Just send the link.
Yep.
Why doesn't I have to pass it before the
All
bill
right.
is paid?
So, our next item is related to the pre-qualification update. Before we get into the details, which I believe Mr. Lemieux is going to walk through, for any of you that don't know, Ms. Cook and Mr. Goodney had a plethora of research to do over the last 10 days, maybe you got to do this? A week? So my understanding is you walked out of here with 2 to 3 boxes of copy paper when the submissions were delivered to the town hall. So on behalf of the committee and the town, I just wanted to thank you in advance for your help in kind of acting as the representatives from this committee to assist the design team and project manager with all of their work. I think it's a good problem to have that we had such a high response, but I just wanted to thank you for that effort, because I know it was not a short time commitment that you had to make on that. So with that, Mr. Lemieux, why don't you walk us through where we stand in any actions you need from us related to the subcommittee's work?
Sure, I can tell you, yeah, we're on, sorry. So again, we had great response. I can tell you that right now, on a scale of 0 to 100, we're probably 95, 96% complete with the process and being able to issue invitations to bid to all of the firms that have been pre-qualified. Largely, the biggest issue with folks not being pre-qualified, and there's a small handful, is mistakes on their part. One of the things you're not allowed any leniency on is if the letter that they send you from their bonding agent doesn't reference the town, this town, more specifically even this project, you're out. We got one for job in Belmont.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
If they don't know who they're giving it to, they
They don't
don't
know
get
who
to
they're
play.
giving it to. So they write a letter and put it in their package. It's for the Southborough Public Safety Project.
Yeah.
Yet it's made out to the town of Belmont
Oh, okay.
for a different job.
Yeah, that's
So
probably.
unfortunately,
chance on that.
we're not allowed to just, so whenever I run into these, I do check back with the AG's office just to make sure that, she hasn't changed her mind on this, or there hasn't been a change, that we don't know about. And she confirmed, the letter is a non-starter.
Okay.
So we're gonna lose 3 or 4 folks just because.
That many, huh?
Yep. We had 115, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
So that's probably the single largest issue. The other issue we have right now is there's a few folks who we're missing references on, and it's not the problem of the firm themselves, it's the problem of their listed referencers. So we are calling those folks directly right now. Most of this was done by sending an email, roughly 4, 5, 6 emails to each firm to basically with a form. That form comes back, we log it in, we get all the scores. Reference checks were done between Context and our office. We basically cut it in half. They did half, we did half. And then we take those reference scores and give them to everybody else's score sheet when we're done. I have this mind-numbingly blinding spreadsheet I will give you all at some point, but not right now because it's not done.
Printed out on big paper.
Big paper. You'll still need a magnifying glass. So that's our second issue, and really that's it. There will be a couple of firms who may not be qualified as a GC, but I would like to wait before I mention that until we've exhausted our efforts to close the loop on all of their information. But I would say that the process has gone very well. The response is great. And I think you're going to have a great number of firms available to bid this thing. What will happen next is, as we receive the final amount of references, we will then send out the invitations to bid, which is all of those firms, just as it said, invitation to bid the project. We'll give them a rough idea of when the plans will be available, which doesn't relieve us from the requirement to advertise correctly, according to the Mass General laws, but we will let them know it's coming, and it's coming in the next few weeks. The only thing that we have open other than that, for elevators, we only received one response. Because of that, we reissued the request for qualifications to attempt a second time to try to get three. Three is the target. As of right now, we only had one additional elevator firm respond, so we're currently at 2, if in fact that second firm responds. If in fact we are below 3, it would be my recommendation to not proceed with the pre-qualification and just go to our option 2, which is to open the elevator scope up to regular filed sub-bid bidding. So basically, it just gets advertised as a non-pre-qualified subsection. All of the other filed sub-bid categories will be pre-qualified because we easily reached over 3. I think the lowest number we have is 5 on one of the categories. So that's where we stand. So the committee met this evening at 5 o'clock, and we voted unanimously for us to just finish the process, Vertex and Context, and updating the final score sheets with the references that are received.
So given that we have to meet with the golf committee next week at 7, would it be appropriate for you to at least have a final discussion with the subcommittee, make your final cuts, and then present that? Or do you want an action tonight on everything but elevator?
I think if you give me an action for everything but elevator, I will just have a list that I'll issue to you to distribute to the committee of, here's the final list.
Okay.
Because I don't
Is
think.
this really just a matter of whether you get references and whether the references check out, which doesn't involve our committee members? Is that what
That
you're
is
saying?
correct. All of the things that I needed the committee member for is they've given me all of that info. This is really just, the references, they're either from the ones they went after or we went after. Now we're doing both, whichever ones are missing. And then we're gonna plug the scores in, and the scores will distribute across the rest of the score sheet. So, it'll either fix itself or it won't.
Does anyone have any questions on, so everything but elevators, so basically general contractor and all the other sub-bidders, except for elevators? I think what we're saying is we're gonna approve them to move forward with their bid letters to those firms, subject to final reference checks.
Correct, and I would also ask you for a second motion that if we end up receiving less than 3 elevators between the original due date and the second due date, that you allow us to move ahead with just filed subbing. That way we don't have to have another meeting, and Jeff can just address the project documents as such without needing to come back again.
Okay. Are there any questions on that before we go through the motion process?
I do. John, what's the score gonna do for us? They're either qualified or not.
Correct, it's
Right.
pass-fail.
So what's the scorecard doing? Or are you just listing who's
So
qualified?
basically what I do with the scorecard is I hide all the columns with the score and just show, because the GCs, everyone will want to know what the results are. The unions, everybody.
Of your score?
Of our score.
Right.
Yeah. So of just the
pass-fail.
pass-fail. They're either
Okay.
qualified or they're not. The ones that aren't will typically ask questions, and we'll share with them the level of detail, but I don't
Okay.
want to have to send out.
So the score's not doing anything. The score's just for you
No,
to,
this isn't like their DCAM score. This is just, they either made it or they didn't.
right? And that's who they get to pick from, right?
Correct.
So we're not doing anything until bids go out and then bid day, essentially. I mean, for everybody else that did all the work, right? These guys did it.
Yeah,
We don't do anything
Thank you
until.
for your service.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks.
Yeah,
Did
you won't
great.
hear, the next thing you're gonna hear about is bidding
Is-
with
right,
those
right.
folks, yep. And the pool will be from this established pre-qualified pool.
Okay.
Number never gets bigger, it only gets smaller from here.
Any questions?
Is it unusual to have that low a number in elevators? Are there that few elevator companies?
We don't wanna talk about elevators.
Okay, thank you.
That's 2 more than they were expecting, right?
That's- The fact that we had, you nailed
It's
it, the
2
fact
more.
that we actually had 2 people respond.
Yep.
Never happens. It never happens.
Because they're installers and manufacturers, which is different than anything else that we have on any job, right?
Right.
So,
Mr. Rooney?
Yeah, for the 8 or 10 people that might be watching this, can you tell me, can you just give me a timeline, just a big 30,000-foot view, when the bids will go out, when we'll receive them, and when we get the
We
shovel
have
in
a
the ground?
schedule item.
We have a very detailed scheduled conversation coming
all
up.
right.
Yep.
So they'll just have to stay tuned in, John.
Yeah. There is, it's purposely last. So, any other questions on the two motions that are coming? So I'll start and make a motion related to the elevators, to director, owners, project manager, and design team, should they receive less than 3 elevator pre-qualification bids, to proceed directly to a filed sub-bid. There a
I'll
second?
second.
Second by Mr. Moorhead. I got that right?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Is there any discussion on that? No further discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? All right, motion carries unanimously. Second motion is to direct the owner's project manager to issue bid invitation letters upon completion of the final reference checks as supported by the subcommittee's recommendations and scoring. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Goodney. Any further discussion? That capture any actions you need on that particular piece, John?
I think you're good, Jason.
All right.
Thank you.
All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. That motion carries unanimously as well. We proceed forward to cost. General background is that the design team only, so we only have one cost estimate this time, not two, given the similarity that existed last time. Now that they have more complete documents, have gone out and gotten a cost estimate of where we stand from a public safety perspective. I think, in general, right, the number that you need to know is we're now, from a public safety component, eating into, if the bids came in exactly to the cost estimate, $351,000 of the contingency. And I think approximately where we last messaged, we were at about 120,000, give or take some markups, et cetera. It was all dependent on where that hardy plank, but it's probably closer to 2.
Close to 180.
It was
Yeah.
180.
Yeah. So, I think macro perspective on public safety, and we'll come to the golf components because that kind of feeds into some of our upcoming agenda topics. But my particular view is there isn't a lot that changed here, but I don't know, Jeff or John, if you just want to maybe
Yeah,
spend
I-
2 or 3 minutes just walking
really,
through.
Just briefly, the 351 is a good, here's your copy.
Thank you.
The 351 is a, focus on that number for a second. If you take away the 25,000 of that 351 was money we moved from the contingency into the construction testing line item. So we're really over 326. And that number, the sheet that you got in your packet that's marked draft, if you notice, that's the number we're over right there. So those numbers tie to the overall budget, larger budget sheet I gave you at the beginning of the meeting. So that 326, if you look at 180 of it as being what was over after DD last time, there's about another 140, 150,000 that's over. So Jeff and I talked about that. Jeff spoke to the cost estimator. And the reality is there's really nothing new that was added to the job that drove this cost beyond one thing. It's a concern by the estimator that he is seeing increased costs to a small degree in fire protection, but to a much larger degree in electrical. And he raised his unit costs in his estimate. Now, we didn't go through it and check each line item to see which unit cost specifically went up, but overall, he said the numbers he is seeing in the market right now on some recent bids for similar type work, the unit cost for electrical is going up. So what he did, rather than just trying to capture it and say, oh, don't worry about it, we'll get it in the escalation, he felt more comfortable marking it up and increasing the cost in those specific line items.
Just to clarify one thing, John's absolutely right. I think that is the thrust of it. Drilling down a little bit further, the cost estimers and we, because we've gotten some bids on other projects as well, are very concerned about a number of different trades, but the escalation in those prices is sort of part of what we were already expecting. So even though unit costs have gone up and have increased in our project, it hasn't, the scope hasn't changed, but that decrease in the escalation and design contingency that you'll see in that front sheet covers that. Essentially, it's what we thought was gonna happen in the market's happened. And where we're seeing things that are going beyond that are what John said, electrical, fire protection, a couple of other minor things, where we're seeing things outstripping what we had predicted to this point. So that's why, that's why those things are higher, and that's why you're mainly getting the difference between the last estimate and this estimate in terms of the additional eating into the contingency.
Are there any questions on the public safety component of this?
Yes.
Kathy?
Can we just, if I'm right, correct a number, John, on your, this, the big spreadsheet here? So, basically, what we're talking about right now is lines 1, 2, 2A, 2B, 3, right? So we've got those taken care of.
Correct.
Okay.
So
So
those-
now we still gotta worry about everything from that point on to make this
Correct.
project come in.
Correct.
Okay, go to, sorry, Jeff, go to Jeff's fees. Isn't line 8 in the contract $1,430,000 that we signed?
Is it $1,430,000 with the,
I think the contract with contacts that got signed was $1,430,000. The $1,392,000 is way back with the town meeting budget. So I think the number should be $1,430,000.
SMS is $1,436,000.
Yeah, it is.
No, 1,380,000 is what it was signed for.
Wow,
Got it right here.
that's impressive.
Wow, you got a raise and.
No, the fact he had that document right there, gee,
So,
Brought it because of the other.
yeah.
30 seconds.
and I believe, and then some of the stuff we've added on relates to the school property and not us. That's why it's not, I think if we then start going to foot
Okay,
your
so
addendums.
1,392, so that's good. 1,380.
Yep.
Okay, then go down to the next line, the $70,000 for additional
That's,
architecture fees. Okay, so,
you've only committed 44 of it.
okay, but tonight we voted for 14
Yep,
and 4.
yep.
And then,
So what's gonna have to happen, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, is you should, you're gonna issue an amendment to your contract to
Yep.
cover those?
Yep.
So until we see that amendment, I'm not gonna, you won't see it on here.
okay, and then you're gonna add the bills that we did approve tonight to that too. The three bills that we approved early.
Well, bills that you approved end up in the expended column. That's not, they're taking away from line
I
items
understand,
already.
so in column D, you're
Yeah.
gonna add it in column D.
No, I'm gonna, in the committed cost column, I'm gonna end up adding, correct, the 4 and the 14, when he gives us a proposed design proposal. When he actually bills us for that work, then it will be in the expended column.
But it sounds like we're probably almost spent the whole 70 at this point then.
Well, you've spent 40, so you've got 44.1, and that left you 25.9.
Right.
And you just approved 14 and 4, so 18, so you've got 7,900 left.
So it's almost gone.
Yes.
But we would hope that the design team doesn't have any other change orders, given that we're headed to construction at this point. So if you look at their contract, it's front-loaded, right? Versus the construction administration, while it's certainly a big chunk, the only thing there is if our contractor's delayed, right, you're gonna add on time on
Yeah,
the
so
back
there's,
end.
there's two items that I think would be potential. One is that if the construction schedule increases beyond what we're contractually obligated for, and we have control over that because we set the schedule in the bids and in the spec. So, if there's unforeseen conditions somehow, whatever happens on site, and it causes them and you guys to all agree, yes, we should extend the schedule, that may be cause to increase our fee. The other one is if the town decides they want to design in changes, add in things, maybe you get a great bid price and you got some extra money, you want to do some other things, and we have to change the design.
It happens.
I mean, that's certainly happened before, that might be additional fees as well. Those are the two big things that I would see. And as you shaking your head, you probably agree that they're not very likely.
One out of 9 opinions, yeah. So you don't need any formal action from us on
No.
the actual, it's
No, this
really
is just-
informatory
This is where we
that,
are. I mean, at
this is
this
where we
point, I
stand.
think it's late to try to say, oh, we've got to go and try to cut that $40,000 new dollars out of the job. The reality is the prices are going up. But again, remind you that we do stay optimistic that, again, Peter's hopefully giving us the middle of the pack pricing, not the, not the bid day price. Not saying it won't come out there's not a possibility that it might come out that way. But, experience would tell us that we will come under that construction number. So hopefully we gain back some of that, 351,000 on bid day. I mean, that would be our hope. So at this point, I think, this is our last estimate. I feel pretty good, given the contingency, given where we are, that, we're in as good a place I think we can be right now. It's time to bid and let the market tell us what the job is really worth.
Yeah, from my perspective, the construction cost at 17 million and the construction contingency at basically the adjusted one, 10%, that's a really good position to be in at this point. So I don't see much to complain about.
We usually do new jobs with 5 to 6. So it's good to have the buffer you have is good.
Quick question.
Sure.
What else have you guys had in the past couple months? What other jobs? Either police and fire and/or combined and/or? Have you seen, what else have you seen and how many bidders have you had?
We've had 2 fire stations open bids between the time we had the DD estimate and now. And the first one had tons of bidders. The second one had hardly any bidders. And the difference is because the second one had the statutory minimum bid period that for whatever reason, they wanted to do it as fast as possible. They had 3 weeks to do filed subs and GCs, and I think that scared most of the market away. And so they may have paid the penalty because those construction costs came in
Far higher than
not
they should have
well,
been,
but
right.
pretty high over our estimate, higher than we'd like. Well, we don't want to go at all over above anyways, but I think there was a big issue with the timing on that, and that was obviously up to the town. The other one that came in pretty much right on the estimate. And we're familiar with the company that got the job. We expect it to go smoothly, and they have a good schedule, and so I'm not too concerned about that. But when we got the sub-bid prices for that project, those were significantly higher, as John said, in a couple of cases, than what our estimates were. And same thing for this other fire station. The sub-bid prices in a couple of cases were significantly higher. And so that's what's causing us to feel unhappy about where the prices are headed. And I know that our cost estimator has seen it in a couple of other projects as well, not our jobs, similar sorts of results. So I think that's, the this early news is not trending well for the bid prices, construction market in general. I think it's very tight. There's not a lot of people with capacity. But on the good side, the cost estimator did feel like your location is favorable. You're not,
It's the most
closer to
pre-qualifications I've
Boston.
ever seen
You got some
on a job.
people that are Worcester area and other places that might want to bid on it as well. So you're not going to get, in his opinion, you're not going to get the same type of burden that you would being closer to Boston.
Mhm.
But you still have access to that market too, which is
Right.
good.
And if they want it, they can come get it, right?
We haven't done anything of this size recently. We did a smaller harbor master building, South Shore. I mean, it's an apple,
Yeah.
comparing an apple and an orange at this point. But I will say, the response we saw from this pre-qualification, as I just said, was the most I've ever seen on one of these, which is great.
Right, that's what I'm hoping that.
And we pulled from some, there's a Connecticut firm, there's a New Hampshire sub. I mean, we were pulling from places other than what we're used to.
20-mile radius,
And a
yeah.
little further west, some GCs that, we only see, like Fontaine Brothers, who only typically bids big schoolwork. It's great that they're a big player, so you're attracting some larger, you're attracting a good mix of larger and smaller
Yep.
GCs, which is good. Keep the competition up.
Mr. Rooney?
This is going to show my lack of knowledge in terms of the public bidding process, and I appreciate you have been walking me through this with baby steps. But, so let's say, for instance, you get a concrete subcontractor comes in at 1.8. Can you say to them, listen, we really want to go with you, but could you come in at 1.6? You can't negotiate like you
No
would
neg-
in a normal world.
You cannot negotiate anything.
Anything.
This is not a normal world.
This is not a normal world. What the price is, the price is.
The GC picks from the 14 that came in separately, they will pick who they want to pick, but if they don't pick the lowest one or close to it, they won't get the bid. So it's going to be the lowest one pretty much all the
There'll
way
be
through.
14 low bidders working for one low bid.
Yeah, but
Low bid
even if
GC.
it's the lowest bid, you can't then go to them, say, listen,
Nope.
you're still a little rich
Nope.
for this town.
Nope.
Not
You
for
can't do that in public
Public
construction.
bidding, you can't
Why?
do that.
Because it's,
And I'm not sure we can answer that question. Talk to the AG and a lot of other people that make the laws. I wish we could get rid of it, but
There is
that's,
no
that's the law of the
negotiation.
land.
No negotiation.
You can obviously negotiate over change orders, and once the contract's signed,
Yeah, that's.
you negotiate, but up until the point it's signed, no negotiation.
I have a question, and I'm looking at, just for reference, the grand summary, which I think is page, well, it says page 1 for a grand summary.
That's the first page of the
28.
cost
The
estimate.
detailed
Yeah.
cost estimate.
Looking at this, I just have a question about the add alternates.
We're staying out of those for now.
Going there next.
We're just talking about base construction, because there's a intertwined conversation.
But then what you're telling me is I get to ask this question in about 10 minutes?
Less than
Less
that.
than that.
Awesome.
Stay tuned.
Just so I know, David, just so I know, what particular item? Is it all of them, or just how it works?
It's the order of them and my
Yeah.
concern.
the
That's
about-
what we have to talk about.
Specifically what we need to talk about
Okay.
tonight.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
can, for the purposes of that sheet, consider them not ordered, not ranked.
Thank
Just, they are what they are.
All right. So any further questions on the cost estimate related to the public safety construction? All right. So my plan is to just send correspondence to the Board of Selectmen saying this is where we're at. They do not have another posted meeting, I don't think, until until basically the day we go out to bid. So should one of them react to that email, they're gonna have to call a special meeting and discuss it. But I think we're well, in my my particular view is I think we're well within what we've messaged. It's just has ticked up a little bit due to the factors that have been discussed thus far. Is there any other messaging on that particular piece that anyone wants me to message? We go out the 28th, so we need to decide that sooner. All right, so now we're gonna go to the add alternates. So I will preface this, and then I'm sure there'll be a lot of dialogue. So earlier in the meeting, I mentioned that the golf course committee is going to. Oh, sorry. Yes, we need to do solar before we can go to add alternates. Yes. Discussion of solar options for police cruiser canopies. So I believe the day after, so December 26th meeting, it came up, someone posed a question to Steve Theron. We were talking about, I think people were upset that we weren't necessarily able to honor the chief's request for the police cruiser canopy. And that was really probably the toughest decision we made to try to get the costs somewhat in line. But Steve Theron brought up the idea of approaching and getting some sort of solar contract with a solar provider, and that solar provider would actually pay for the construction of the canopy itself. And in addition to that, is my understanding that there may be certain income kickbacks to the town, so it actually may turn an expense into an income-producing item, depending upon how the town decides to go about it. My understanding is Steve had a conversation with one contractor, but there's others in the area that do it. And we would need the selectmen to go out and get, basically an RFP for this. My view is, why wouldn't we take something for free and give the chief something that he operationally needs, especially if it's going to turn into something that would be income producing for the town. But furthermore, I think they had a desire to think about the roofs of the building. I'm not sold on this particular building, but I do know that the school department is in the process of considering solar for their particular facilities. So should the town be able to collaborate with the school department and get more of a bigger contract in terms of energy producing, I think it bodes well for all of us as taxpayers, and also solves a huge need on this particular project and eliminates one of our ad alternates. So I guess, John, is there any facts that you would outline before we open it up for conversation, or is that?
No, just, Steve is attempting to get a copy of an RFP, one or two, just to see exactly what we would need the town to go out and procure. Obviously, we need that information so that we can connect that with Jeff to see what do we put in and what do we not put in. You know, because as of right now, the plan is, with no alternate being accepted, we're putting in about a third of the covered parking that had been figured in the beginning. If you're going to if you gotta make arrangements for that other 2/3, even just pipes underground, I mean, last thing we wanna do is cut your new pavement, even if you're getting it for free. You don't want somebody coming in with a concrete saw ripping into your new asphalt to put in these foundations. From Steve's conversations, they will pay for the entirety of it, but it's the connection to the building that I'm not clear on yet. And that connection to the building isn't just pipes. It's, the inverter that needs to be put in the electric room, we need a little bit more information. So, Steve's very confident that, this is something that can be real for this project, but we have a kind of a tight timeline to try to make sure we get it in, at least keep the room available. And we could always, timing being what it is, we could always add the pipe later. You don't get the benefit of the bid day cost, but I think if you're really offsetting it's a $300,000 ad, the difference you're gonna pay to put that conduit into a contractor as a change order is a difference in markup on bid day versus a change order. It's
But-
5% on some smaller amount.
If we take no action with a solar provider, then your documents have a covered canopy in them as an ad alternate right now, right?
Correct.
So,
For the whole shoot.
so the importance of this, right, let's just say the Board of Selectmen was here and made a decision that that's the path they wanted to go on this particular project, right? Because we're only a recommendation sort of authority here.
If you can do it.
You would have to take it out of your documents, right?
Reject the alternate and do it. Go to the AG. Sorry, Jason.
That's a great point. I'm sorry, can you ask, he's throwing curveballs at me while you're,
If
Trying to
we,
think 3 steps ahead.
if the Board of Selectmen were here and said, this is how we want to approach the canopy, take it out of your public safety budget, and we're gonna go down this RFP route. Jeff would have to take it out of his construction documents in the next 2 weeks, other than maybe this pipe and inverter and anything else you need to hook it up, right?
Mhm.
So really, we're working with 2 weeks of time.
Yeah, we need to know
But what's the
ASAP.
curveball?
the curveball is if you take it,
If you went ahead with it in the alternate, let's say, we don't have enough time, so let's just bid it with the alternate. And then at bid date, when you got the bids in, enough time has gone by, you've got more data. In the meantime, you said, hey, it's a great option, let's go with this third party. And then you basically reject the alternate. The question is that legal? Can you then turn around to a third party, have them come and
yes,
install it?
because the third party wouldn't be one of the GCs that bid the job.
Okay,
So-
just throwing it out there, I just wanna make sure it's legal for us to do it
I
that
guess
way.
the reason I was raising it was to remove an alternate, because unless I'm missing something, it seems like a no-brainer.
Well, my point of just throwing it out there is simply that it doesn't cost you anything to put it in as the final alternate and just get prices on it. If it's legal to swap it out with some third party later, that it's already kind of being documented that way. You get prices on it, might as well.
Right. We get bid day prices on it.
If it's the last alternate, then you gotta take everything else before you get there, so,
Your canopies don't have solar on them though, do they?
no, not currently.
No, so they're.
So that would be another component you'd have to add after the fact, but at least you'd have the data. It's up to you guys, but that was my
I'm just
consideration.
worried if
Would be an ad alternate, so,
the things in front of it are
Significant.
hot topics in the town, right? And
Mhm.
so let's just say those hot topics don't go well from a funding perspective, and you need the I guess.
gotcha.
But I think what we're saying is if we pull it out, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It would be a change order later. If, let's just say the solar thing falls through.
You could always add it as a change order later, especially if you didn't, where you get into trouble is if you do it as an alternate, you choose not to take it, and then you add it as a change order later. Because then somebody could argue
You'd have to change the
that you
scope.
may have changed the order of bidding.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it could change the order of
Yeah.
bidding, how some of these GCs bid alternates.
Yeah, I would
You see some crazy numbers that don't match with these estimates.
So
They
it
do
sounds like we leave it in there.
I would say that you either take it out or be confident if you leave it in that where it's placed in the order is not gonna cause you heartburn later on. Because I think that's the issue Jason's raising, is the placement, because if it's
Correct.
before, it sends a message, if it's after, it sends a different message, but yet you can't get to it until you
He's
take
holding his head.
all the
Yeah,
others.
I'm looking at keeping it in, I'm saying, realistically, I mean, unless these bids come in really low, we're not building that unless someone builds it for us, right?
Right. I mean,
So to me, it's almost useless to
If
have
the
it in there.
assumption
If
is
it's-
on
and
bid
it's
day that-
it can be a standalone project if
Yeah.
needed later.
well, you can, and we have had clients use their contingency for bid alternates. So, yes, you could take it if you wanted to use the contingency for it. I'm not necessarily recommending that,
Because you're gonna get a better price on bid day than if you add it as a change order later.
right?
And purely just, if you figure a GC goes at a job with a 5% markup, and a change order is 15, 10% of 300 grand is 30,000. So adding it as a change order will cost you an additional $30,000 to do it as a change order. So there is a benefit if this solar thing falls through to have it,
Having it in the,
to have it and be able to act on it. So it's not 2 weeks, that doesn't give us 2 weeks, that gives us 7 weeks. Because you've got 2 weeks to bid and then the 5 weeks of bidding where we could get this figured out, and then we could always address it via an addendum
In the midst of bidding,
in
we
the midst
could.
of bidding. Not the best scenario, but it's not just 2 weeks. So we don't have to have the answer now, because he already has, we have to have the answer soon, but he already has the canopies in the drawings as an alternate. The order has yet to be determined, so
I don't understand the order issue here.
because we have to take them in order. If we take the alternate, if we accept them, we have to take them in order. So if we say alternate one is the golf course clubhouse, we have to take the orders before we
Yeah,
get
you-
to
you
the solar.
can't-
You have to take them
can't pick.
sequentially, 1, 2, 3.
That's the
and
law.
Only 1, 2, and 3.
Look at you, all right.
Okay, so you're gonna have to talk. I still don't understand
Why is that a
Well,
issue?
so-
why it matters
It-
what order we put these in.
Because, let's say you did the carports first at 300,000, and then all the golf items followed second, and the golf is 500,000. At the end of the day, the bids come in, and you're like, great, we've got an extra $600,000 to play with, we can cover the golf. Well, you've got to cover the golf and the carports, because you put the carports first. Okay, so you've got 800,000 in alternates, but only 600,000 you're comfortable in spending on bid day. You can't get to the golf without going through the carports and buying them. So you flip them. Okay, you flip it and golf comes in at 700,000, you're like, oh my God, but we still have that $600,000 we're comfortable spending, we can spend it on the carports. You can't, because you put the carports after the golf. So you've got to commit and decide what's
The
most
order.
important. So there is a strategy here, and it's, you know,
And that's going in the bid documents that the
going in the bid
GCs are
documents.
bidding on.
All right,
Correct.
well, let me say something I actually know what I'm talking about. I still don't quite get this. I've got a client that does nothing but solar stuff, and I've got a couple clients that are the investors, so this should work great. You've got to have a taxable investor that actually puts the money in. They go to the bank, they borrow 2/3 of the money. They can include anything they want to in the project. They can include those pipes. They can repair roofs. They can do all kinds of stuff. They can do what they want to do as far as the cost. It all qualifies for the credit. The taxable guy gets a 30% credit. He only puts in 30% of the money, so he gets a dollar for dollar credit. He gets his money back with his first tax return. So it's a great deal for the investor. He's got to hold it for 5 years, and then they can flip it back to the town because the credit would be recaptured if you don't keep it for 5 years. So the town gets it back after 5 years. The town may make some money on the 5 years depending on how much power they use versus what they generate, but that just, I don't know what those numbers are. But I can't, and there's lots of people that want to do this, so I can't imagine that we're not going to be able to do this. So I agree we've got to have a backup plan here, but it should be a win-win for everybody.
But what you're saying is put it as the last alternate.
Well, so I
To
think.
put words in your mouth.
So-
To put words in your mouth. That's what you're
So-
saying, is to put order at last.
I think we can talk about ordering of alternates. I think we need to decide whether we want, whether I have to approach the Board of Selectmen to start thinking about this, like ASAP, whether it's 2 or 7 weeks, that's short time in government time. So, and my personal view is if this is the direction we're going, I'm not waiting until the 27th unless they make me wait, because I just think it's that important of an issue because of it's going to impact the ordering conversation. And I mean, to me, don't forget is Chief Morrow still over there? Did he removed his when we were struggling. He removed. Why wouldn't we put that
There's no EMS right now.
right now? Question whether we would need that back on the plans for planning, but I think there's broader implications of not only saving the town that money, regardless of whether we come in $1 million or $2 million or under or over. Chief Paulus gets what he needs for his department, and we can add back in what the chief actually already gave up on the fire side. So I guess I would like a motion, if everyone's supportive of it, to approach the Board of Selectmen about a solar contract for this facility and to consider the broader application to other town-owned buildings,
We're talking about a solar application
to the
for
canopies.
the canopies.
Yes.
Are we just talking about the solar application, or are we talking about the canopy themselves? Won't
they're gonna
come in
put the
and do
canopies
canopy?
up.
Our price, the cost estimate price, is just for the actual
It's just canopy.
structure, roofing, concrete, that sort of stuff. The
That's
stuff
the
that this
300.
stuff that Vertex is looking into would be all inclusive.
Is all in, and that's what I want to, to point out here, is our 300 grand is no solar panel.
Right.
And what we're looking to find could be everything. So I think that just needs to be cleared up.
How certain are we that we can get these, and are there other things that might?
Well,
restrict us from
you're gonna
getting
issue an
them, or-
RFP, and if nobody
Yeah.
answers it, nobody wants to do it.
No.
If you go to Lincoln Sudbury High School, have you ever seen, there's a ton of them. They did a whole chunk of their parking lot in it.
I know
You know,
there are people that will
that's-
want to do this,
so
that's
that's-
positive.
So that, there's a risk. We take it out, we put an RFP out, nobody answers. That's a problem. Then you can always add them back in by change order. It's not great, it will cost you some money, but it can be a
we're
decision
there.
that's asked,
Right.
discussed later.
That seems like a pretty good gamble to take. I mean, I think one of Steve's points he made to me was just the recent tax bill, which Kathy highlighted, but to put it in layman's terms, they basically literally get 100% deduction on year one on their tax return for these things.
Well, let me even go further. Not only so the investor only funds 30% of it, with credits 30%, so they get a dollar for dollar credit, and they get the depreciation on it, and the depreciation has really been expanded, so they write off the cost of it too. You have to reduce your outside basis by half the credit, but you still get the other half. So it's a real win-win from the investor that
Yeah.
more than 100% of his money back the first year, then he still gets his depreciation. So they're very lucrative, and a lot of people want to do them, so I just can't imagine that somebody wouldn't want to do this.
Unless there's something about the site that makes it less attractive. There's not enough
What could that
solar
be?
access,
Well,
there's too
That's what I
many
was gonna
trees,
say,
there's,
is the
who knows?
trees, it has to face a certain way, that's the only.
That would be the only issue that I can foresee that might be.
Yeah, we're talking about the cruiser area, which is the, is that the?
It's on the north side of the,
North
it's on the
side?
north side of the.
Yeah, so,
That's the thing.
obviously the building itself could potentially shade it, particularly in the wintertime. But it's far enough away from most of the trees, I don't think you're gonna get tree shading.
But this is,
building.
they'll do this not just for a canopy, they'll do it on the top of the building. I mean, we have a large swath of flat,
Yeah,
South-facing.
we're only talking about
Talking
the
about the canopy.
canopy and.
but what you could go out and get, what you could,
For what they would easily be able to kind of break off out of the project and give to somebody. If we're talking about going on top of a roof, it's probably a different thing. It might be a second RFP or something like that, but it's a different type of scenario. There's no real structures. They just build the frames and set them on top of the roof.
right, but I'm saying, can't we as a town put that RFP out separately, get the canopy and get that, I mean, we have 5 bays of,
Let's focus on
Fire
the
department.
canopy.
I'm just saying, we got a chance, if we're gonna load up our building with solar,
Yeah, but, I mean, it could affect the aesthetics, though, as well, from the Lattisquama Road. All of a sudden,
I
you
mean-
see all these panels, they may not be thrilled about
So let's
that.
just stick to the canopy for now, and see where it
I'm all,
goes.
yeah, I'm all in favor of
All right.
this idea.
So is there a motion?
Thought you made it.
I did not make a motion. I suggested something along those lines, but I'll make one then. Make a motion that the Public Safety Building Committee approach the Board of Selectmen about a RFP to solicit solar vendors to fund the construction of canopies at the new Public Safety Building project.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, so now I think it's strategy time in terms of what we do with the ad alternates. So let me throw out, now we can go back, David, to the ad alternates that are in play. There are a few ad alternates in play. The first is the canopies themselves. I'm not gonna go in a particular order, right? That's what we have to decide here. But I think we just decided not to put that as an alternative. It's kind of my view of approaching that, unless the Board of Selectmen say, no thanks, keep going and add it as an alternate to your plan.
Right, or we find that it's just a project that no one's interested in.
But we're not gonna know that before the bid.
Okay.
We'll put this out, yeah.
Correct.
All right.
You gotta
then,
write a whole RFP for it, get it
Gotcha.
vetted, get it approved.
Do it next year.
or- Okay.
Yeah.
Well, just short of that, is there any chance that there's someone can look at this and say, no one's gonna bid on this because you got shade from the building? Or is that only gonna flush out in an RFP process? Do you know what I'm saying?
I think you get bidders, but they might have something in their language about, having appropriate conditions for this type of project here, this
All right,
sort of
because I'm
third-party
just
thing.
talking about a reality check, curbside consult, someone says,
I think Steve can help you with,
Yeah.
Steve can help us with that.
So I think at best, this would be our last alternate. Is that a fair statement to the pros that do this? So then it's really a decision of whether we keep it in or whether we just get the wiring over there, but you need to know that for purposes of your documents, right?
Well, it's also potential that the town may want to take advantage of that later on. And so would we just keep that duck bank shown to that location regardless of whether it's in or out?
Right.
I think you have to keep
Yeah, you're
that
saying
in.
Put it
Yeah.
into base scope.
I agree.
Just take it out of the alternate and put it into base
You
scope.
need to be able to get into the electrical room.
Yeah, so basically you would have a
Underground.
duck bank, and then the question for us is whether we fund as an alternate potentially the solar canopies if something were to fall through, but it clearly would not be our first alternate anymore, given the other items in front of it.
Right, and the protection, if it fell through later, as Jeff alluded to a little bit, is you just would have to change the design some. So if the alternate as written had 10 spaces in it, you have to redesign it for 9 or 11, just not 10, because then you can make the case that you changed it enough.
But if we have it as our last one, we run the distinct opportunity that we have a response back and we know there's 10 companies that are interested by the time you find out, right?
Yep.
So, good.
What if we put it back into the project, not as an alternate, but in the project, and then we decided down the road that
Take it out.
to take it out?
Get a credit and you'd
Can
get
we-
pennies on
can
the
we
dollar.
pre-
Get
Agree on
300 grand in the
credit?
back, yeah.
You won't,
that?
you won't,
You can do it.
but you'll never
It's
see
absolutely
300,000.
feasible to do it that way, but the money you would save would never be close to what you had to pay on bid day for it, so you'd be getting pennies back on the dollar.
They don't cost that much if you take them back out.
You'll probably get 200 grand as a credit if you
By a
take that one
contract
into
or a vote.
effect. So it's just, you're bidding a lump sum, so it's a hard, no one shows you their cards. So it's, when it comes time to ask for a credit,
It doesn't cost 300 grand.
yeah,
Okay.
would not
I didn't know if
recommend.
there was something we could put in there to,
No, alternates are your best way to manipulate, but,
Freudian slip.
it's just wrong choice of words.
Use the law again with us, right?
To give you flexibility on bid day. That's the only way to do it, to give you flexibility in the price you're gonna pay.
and before we know where this is gonna rank, I'm curious about these other ones. Can we talk about them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'll tee it up and then you guys can walk through the details. So, yeah, I didn't really mean that. So alternate one is the parking and driveway, which my understanding is the golf committee has submitted a, application to CPC. It supposedly falls within the 4 letters of what CPC can fund.
Yep.
It's obviously subject to CPC approving that application and then bringing it forward to successful town meeting vote, but it would be funded from CPC, not from kind of your normal tax levy.
And Jason, I believe that does not have any contingency built into it. This is the number on the estimate, is the
Mhm.
number they're putting in. So if we got an alternate back on bid day that was twice this number, you're not getting extra CPC funds for that.
Right.
We need to, yeah, we'll talk about that when you're done.
Okay. The next is the retaining wall, which to me is part of the parking in driveway. I don't know if they have to do it as two separate applications or how the procedurally works, but in my simple mind, I was thinking about those as like one and the same. Your funding source is an article at town meeting. Town meeting's not gonna approve the retaining wall, but not the part, right?
Correct me
They're
if
so
I'm wrong,
intertwined.
These are broken up because of where they were in the estimate, right?
They're broken out because the folks writing the article, I believe, needed them broken out.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's fair from a
We could- we
construction
can-
perspective to view those together,
On bid
right?
day, we could view this as alternate one.
Okay.
you
I
know,
think we
and
could,
to-
I mean,
We'll come back to numbers, because I
Right.
don't wanna,
I don't mean position. I
A
mean,
single
Yeah.
alternate,
Yeah.
a
You can
single
put them
vote.
together.
Single.
okay.
yeah,
So-
I would advocate that we, I mean, it would be simpler from a bidding perspective to just label them all alternate one on the bid documents.
All meaning
Both
parking, driveway,
1A,
and
1B.
retaining wall?
1A and
All as-
1B would be
All
labeled
as one unit.
one, alternate one, because we need to actually create that stuff now so the bidders know what they're looking at.
Yeah, you wouldn't build the retaining wall without the parking lot, you wouldn't build the parking lot
Yeah.
without the retaining wall, right?
But I guess the distinction I'm making is that on bid day, you wouldn't have the ability to see the difference between the two. You wouldn't have, break it out. But I think I agree with you that they're probably going to vote all or nothing.
Mark,
This
are
is
you
that-
aware if that's one article or two from CPC, the parking lot and driveway versus the retaining wall?
It's one.
I think that's going to be one article. I'm not sure whether the work that CPC is going to recommend paying for the relocation of the hole in the tee box is also going to be included inside one article or not. CPC hasn't come forward with the language for their articles yet, so it may be one lump sum article from CPC for golf.
Okay.
But Mark, doesn't CPC do it all on one article with different parts to it?
They can.
Usually? But isn't that what they usually do?
I don't think this is usual, so I'm not sure how they're going to handle this, whether they'd break it out into multiple articles or not. I would think because it's all for one purpose, they may put it all in one article.
In their normal article?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
The one that they always, every year they come and they say, this is what we want to spend with, each of the 4 categories, right?
Well, that's their administrative article.
Right?
That's not this article.
So they're going to separate this
So
from that
you,
one.
correct, you have, so from CPC this year, you'll have their administrative article, which says, here's what we get for the money, and here's how it goes into the various buckets. You'll have an article to pay for the principal and interest for the bond for the Burnett House. And then you'll have 5 or 6 projects. And each project is separated out into a separate article.
Well, that's what I can remember. So you just answered the question. So they do the projects as separate articles?
They do, so, but the question is still germane, because I'm not sure, I would think that all the golf stuff would be in one article, the parking lot, the holes, the tee box, the retaining wall. I think that would all be in one article. I don't think
Not
they
with
break it up.
everything else you're going to use the rec money for?
No,
Okay.
no,
All right.
no.
So then the other one is the clubhouse relocation, which is not funded by CPC, and I think they're still working through how that may be funded. Is that correct? Or it's gonna be a warrant article of some sort?
Yes.
Okay. And then there's obviously the carport. So David, sorry to take so long to get to that, but that's the genesis of what we have to decide. So I think the decisions that are on the table here are, I think we have general consensus to combine the first two, the parking lot, driveway, and retaining wall. I think that the question is whether you keep the clubhouse separate, or you put it in with alternate one, or you keep it separate. All right, that's really what we have to decide. And then where the carport goes, if any, in that ordering, right?
And my understanding is that there may or may not be funding to do some of these projects. My
Correct.
question is, if there's no funding, is it stuck coming out of our budget?
Nope.
No.
So when we get to the project schedule,
Not until we accept the alternate.
yeah,
No, but
It-
Right, okay.
I just-
the reason why we're doing this is to get you an actual, and get golf an actual price beyond an estimate. And that's why it's being bid as an
That's why
alternate.
we're doing it.
There's economy of scale to use the contractors to do this, but no, it's none of our budget, except for the $30,000 that we can spend to move the clubhouse.
Right, so just to be clear, the golf clubhouse listed at 276,663. That's everything else that the house gets put on. The only thing covered in the construction bid up above is take down the porch, lift it, and move it.
Set it
And set it down
So,
on something.
Pick it
So
up
if-
and move it is covered, what's under it isn't.
I know what's, correct.
The permanent.
The permanent, what's under it, isn't covered, correct.
Okay.
Otherwise, all we're buying is to disconnect it, move it, and put it on cribbing. It'll end up sitting on big wooden blocks, because we gotta get it out of the way to build the public safety
I
building.
get it.
Mhm.
So, all right,
Do you have a question, David?
no.
So we're not paying for this.
We're not paying for it, but it goes into our bid, which is why it's very important for us to structure the ad alts so that when the bids come back, it will coincide with town meeting votes, and they'll know how to accept or reject the bids.
We
But-
tried to pay for it, but
Right,
bond
so,
council said no.
so right now, as an example, you're going to town meeting with the sum of 135 and 79. So let's call that $215,000 to CPC to approve it. If they approve it, that doesn't mean the alternate won't come in at 300,000 or 180. So that's the semantics of how that works out afterwards, you know.
But we'll have those numbers before town meeting, and if they, somebody can make an amendment at town meeting to the article to increase it, if we know that the numbers aren't right.
So if this gets
Ha-
approved,
Hang on, sorry. Mark has been very anxiously waiting.
No, I'll be quick, I appreciate it. Just a couple quick questions for John. John, is it advantageous, from the bidder's perspective, to put all of the golf pieces, all the clubhouse-related stuff, the parking lot, retaining wall, driveway, all of that stuff inside of one article, or inside of one ad alternate, rather than breaking them out?
No, because
They're
And
separate
my
trades.
follow-up question, the reason I ask that, which helps with the ordering of the ad alternates, can you then, Jeff's smiling, maybe he knows where I'm going with this, can you then accept the ad alternate? So as soon, you get the money for the parking lot, you get the money for the retaining wall, the driveway, you don't get the money for the clubhouse. But you can accept the ad alternate and then do a change order to eliminate the clubhouse piece.
Yeah, the problem though is because the total of, reason doesn't apply to what the GCs will put on their
Right.
bid form for
Right.
this. You could have a bidder who, because he really wants the job, if you did the driveway and the retaining wall, then for the clubhouse, he puts $100,000. We all know it's the wrong number, but he
Right.
buried his money somewhere else.
I understand.
So the problem is you just, we can't pull that out.
Yeah.
We can't pull that out later. So
Right.
you've got to, to us as a group, I think we need to look at it as, even if we price them separately.
Yep.
I think you got to look at either you're doing golf or you're not with these items, because to do the driveway and the retaining wall does you no good if you're not giving the house a place to go.
Well, I think given, if golf doesn't continue on that site for whatever reason, if town meeting decides it's not something you fund, I still think, given the fact that you're gonna have 55 acres of open space and you're gonna have people coming who want to do things other than golf, if golf isn't there, that the retaining wall and the parking lot probably are still things that would happen. So I
Then
think,
if that's the case, I would put them in separately.
But Mark, don't you also want them in separately? Don't you want the CPC funded piece separate? So that if the actual cost is more than what is in the article now, right? We got a chance to amend that at town meeting to increase it to the cost, to the real cost.
I think so long as you can break out the cost, as you can understand what the cost is for those specific pieces, I don't think it matters, but
To get that number, then it'd have to be broken out, wouldn't it?
Right, so if you
That's why
lump
we
it all,
don't
if
know.
you,
Is
if
it-
you lump the piece of CPC.
is it
it's not
easier to
gonna
break
be-
them out? Absolutely. I was just my question for John was just trying to see if it gives us any more flexibility, which,
No, because you'll end up losing,
right,
They lump it.
it may be more convenient, but they're still gonna be
Right.
bidding it out separately.
Yep.
They're still gonna be estimating it separately, so it's no big deal for them to
right,
put it on two different lines.
right.
Because CPC is
Okay.
paying for those two,
But
so you can
Mark,
do
can
those
you
two.
clear up,
Go ahead.
is CPC is going to take driving parking and the retaining wall? CPC is not going to touch the foundation?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think, okay.
And CPC has not finalized that yet, but they are entertaining the submission. So those are the things that they're looking at funding, and we should see a separate article for those at town meeting from CPC.
Okay. I cut Brennan off, and then John,
Yeah. I mean, I have, I guess this train has left the station, but I see the building, the golf course operation is conditioned precedent to even building this building, because but for the golf course continued operation, there wouldn't be the money to build the building. But I guess that train has left the station. In any event, my question is this. There would have been work for parking construction independent of the golf course. You had to do parking lot work anyway, correct?
For the public safety, yeah, sure,
Yeah.
there's part.
And would you also have had to have built a retaining wall as well?
I think it's probable that we would not have to have built
But
those
it's
retaining
possible that
walls.
you would have to have built one as well.
It's hard to say.
Yeah. I'm wondering why those two costs can't come in within the contract, the parking lot and the retaining wall.
It's probably not our question to answer. We could do it however way the town wants to do it. This is the way that we were told to break it out, so we've done that.
And where we've got the retaining wall in the parking lot, we wouldn't be using if it wasn't for golf. I mean, if it's off on the side.
gravel.
Yeah, I think that the question about the retaining wall is simply, do we have enough grade distance from where the grade starts sloping to our parking lot for public safety? And I think in most cases we do. But I haven't actually done a design specifically with the level of effort that was obviously required to get planning board approval to prove it out. My guess is it probably would work without the retaining wall, but nobody's done the design work to prove it.
Brennan, you've been waiting.
I just had a quick question on the, so I don't know if I totally understand the adult process in that, if we come under budget, let's say we want the carport, and we can afford, and there's enough money for that, then that's in there. But adding these the golf course items in, and they're approved at town meeting, does that then increase our budget if we're being reimbursed by
Yeah, so
CPC?
basically, if CPC comes back and funds the $215,000 for those two items, that money has to be tracked within our budget separately. So when the bills, we've done we've done a number of historical renovation projects, and CPC never pays for the whole thing. They pay for like 80%. They don't pay for landscaping, they don't pay for paving, they don't pay for a bunch of things. So basically, it's one project, but in-house, you're keeping track of two separate accounting sheets to know what CPC is funding versus what's the rest of the borrowing that the town does. So however it, however it gets set up, we would just make sure, and that's why one of the big reasons we're doing the alternate, because it keeps it clean. The GC is bid on bid day $215,000 for the parking lot and the retaining wall. It's easy to track. So when the monthly bill comes in, the first time they bill $50,000 against it and a $1 million, progress payment total. We can tell accounting, okay, the $1 million is from the $22 million. The $50,000 is from the $215,000, and we'll track it separately.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Litt?
Just a brief procedural thing. It was suggested by Ms. Cook that if the amount comes in higher, one can amend the article. Well, under the general rules of town meeting, you can't increase the amount of spending because you haven't given proper notice. So you can always decrease a budget amount or a warrant article amount, but you can't easily increase it. The moderator is likely to rule it out of order.
Thank you. Mark, do you know if the applications included a gross up on these numbers, or were they literally the direct numbers that came from the cost estimate?
I did ask that the numbers that were provided had the markups and contingency added into them and that, so they should be carrying those pieces as well, so we shouldn't be short.
Okay. So I guess we need to give you direction tonight on how we'd like to proceed in the adult, so you have the correct documents in place. So I'll throw something out there, and somewhat intertwined with the schedule is bids are currently due on the Thursday of the week of town meeting. I plan to make a request to our team to move that up to the Monday, so basically the first night of town meeting. So theoretically, the leaders of town would be walking into town meeting floor with kind of an idea of where these numbers came back, especially if it's lower and they're meeting certain resistance. They would at least be armed with a number. Of course, if the number comes back twice as much, they may rethink how they approach the article. But I think more knowledge is better than less in terms of helping, them educate the voters and the voters make a decision. So I thought it would be silly on our behalf to be off by 3 days on that process, because no one has a crystal ball of what night that may fall. So I think you have to assume it's going to fall on night one. So my suggestion would be that we group what's currently shown as alternate 1 and 2, which is parking, driveway, and retaining wall, and make that alternate 1. I think the point that Mr. Purple made is, that's obviously going to fall with CPC. I think that has a different use than maybe just golf, right? It has a much broader use for folks in the community. So I think, that should be kind of stand on its own.
So, I'm sorry, so 1A and 1B should be 1?
Yeah, so parking and driveway and retaining wall would be add alternate 1, which would give you a parking facility and the necessary retaining wall to support that. And our understanding is that that would all be funded through some sort of CPC article, right? So then, let's just say the CPC article failed on town meeting floor. Then these gentlemen would know that week that they'd have to reject the alternative, right? There's no other way that they could accept it. And then our project would not be delayed because of golf course funding. Then second, right, would be taking the new infrastructure for the clubhouse, making that alternate 2, which would then, even if the CPC funding passes and the warrant funding fails, you still get the parking in place. You may have to reject the clubhouse at bid response day, which would be within that week, right? And you would move forward. And obviously, we'd work collaboratively with the golfers in that situation to try to figure out a solution, but it would be a separate bid package at that point. And then I think we need to call the ball on whether we include the carport as number 3 or just leave it out completely. But that's my proposed direction that we give to our consultants.
So Jason, if you do it that way, I'm still struggling with this a little bit. If you do it that way and the CPC article fails, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that automatically then the golf clubhouse
Would be
fails?
out.
Is
But,
out?
yeah, but I guess my view in this is you can't really have a clubhouse without parking. And I'm not, I guess, does anyone think that the CPC article would have a lower percentage chance of passing than the actual potentially debt-funded article?
No.
So I'm trying to line this up for as best success as possible. I think the selectmen need to weigh in here too, because this goes far beyond our,
Also, the reality too is this is gonna happen. We're gonna have the results of town meeting, and then we can meet and say, okay, what are we signing, what are we generating a contract for? So let's say the job came in $500,000 under. You may have some financial flexibility. I'm not, the market's saying you probably won't, but you may. So there may be decisions to be
but
had.
we can't make that decision because we've already have this advice from bond counsel that we can't fund these
Oh,
items.
I'm sorry.
Now,
You're right.
now, they could certainly go back to town meeting 45 days later and say, public safety is now $500,000 less.
Move money.
Can we do something? But that's,
Sorry, you're right.
I'm trying to stay within the,
You're absolutely right.
But I think your bet is a good one, that I've never seen a CPC article fail. There was a lot of discussion last year about the lights, but I still have never seen one fail. They've already got the money there, it's just a question of how they spend it. The 276 is additional spending, so I think you're making the right bet as far as what's more likely to pass of the two.
I'm just trying to set the town up with options. I'm not trying to call a ball one way or another.
No, but I think you're doing the order the right way.
Mr. Rooney?
What's the best strategy to ensure that the chief gets his carport? Does it put an alternate in, or how do we do that?
Solar.
Well, I think the best is pushing the solar as
Okay.
quickly as possible,
All right.
right? Like, because I think Chief Moore, you were out of the room, but I think our view is if we can get you your carport back with the solar, it's no dollars out. I think that's, in my view, the best way. I would keep it in at the bottom, right? Golf would have to pass to be able to get it. But I think these gentlemen have told us we could always do a change order later on. So,
When you say golf would have to pass, you're talking about a town meeting?
yeah, because those would be alternates 1 and 2.
To get to
I don't think we wanna
carports
put
as an
the-
alternate.
But the carport is not town meeting dependent.
No, but where we
No,
order
but
it,
if
he's
we
saying.
put the carport first and we reject the carport, then even
get
if
to
golf
golf.
gets funded, we can't fund it with our bid.
Why?
Because you have to go in the order you presented. That's why this is
Those silly
to
state
accept
bidding
game
laws.
of cards. Yeah.
Prioritized.
No, I think Jason's right. If we put the parking in the drive and the retaining wall in one, and we get that funded, and we get the clubhouse foundation as number 2, so then we know the day the bids come in and the night of town meeting that we can now move that thing and have a place to put it and get a good price on it. I think that's important to say, is that this might be a sticking point for some GC, is that, oh, these guys really want this, so yeah, it costs $200,000, you know? And then the carport goes last, because we can't get to all those things. We can't get to the carport unless we do all those things to make this job happen. I think you're right on the order.
I think you're right on the order.
Or do you leave the carport out completely?
No, because then we just put it in as an adult and
Buy
we
ourselves
just never
7
accept
weeks,
it.
right? Is
Yeah,
that
so
what
you
I'm
put
hearing?
it
I
in.
don't see any downside by putting it in.
Right.
Yeah, and what you do is Jeff tweaks the drawings so that the base bid includes the conduit
conduit.
from the building
Right.
across, and just whereas before maybe that wasn't included, just move the cloud a little bit.
Yep.
And include that infrastructure so that if the police is going, we've bought a highway underneath the parking lot, so we don't have to cut it up later.
And John, if it's last, we never have to touch it if we don't do the solar route. So it's fine, leave it in, I think.
And if the contractors were to lowball the alternates, right, because whatever reason they do,
Is what it is.
haven't we effectively then put some of the cost to the project that we didn't think we could pay?
I think
Okay.
I think it is
So
what it
I'll
is
say
at
no
that
more.
point.
It's only happening because of it, right?
What sense does it make if the concrete contractor is in building and pouring a foundation for the public safety building to not move a couple 100 feet to put the foundation in?
That's not the argument is that town council has said we can't pay for that.
I understand that.
work. But you're absolutely right. If this works and is funded,
Yes.
I bet you they will be pouring that at the same time.
Right, but that's going to be part of his or her concrete bid, correct? Right from the get-go, it's not gonna be,
Yeah, but the money that pays him won't be. The money that pays him is gonna come from 2 pockets, and that's the issue here. The contractor will get 1 check, but internally, in-house, downstairs or over here, it's coming from 2 different funding sources.
But I think you said yes too quick to what he said. That concrete for the golf course foundation won't be in that core bid. It's gonna be an alternative, whatever.
It would be in the alternate,
oh, it's not gonna be in the core bid
No.
then?
Not in the base
Correct.
bid.
yeah.
But we can accept these very quickly. We can accept the add alternates pretty quickly.
Oh, you have to. You have to accept the
like
alternates
a week.
before you sign the contract, so that the contractor you choose
Knows what he's.
Knows
knows
what
what he's
they're buying,
getting,
right.
because the reality is, the way the contractors bid, the contractor that wins on just the base may not be the contractor that wins with the base plus all the alternates. Sometimes the order changes a little bit. That's why you have to decide early, because you're making it you're talking about a $17, $18 million job to somebody based upon whether you say yes or no to one of these alternates.
Right, we're not gonna accept the alternate in August and say, now build us a foundation.
Right.
We're gonna,
And that's why you have
accept
to
it
go
very
in
quickly.
order, so you
I
can
mean-
game the system.
the more I think about Kathy's comment, a contractor would potentially be silly to allocate the money, to allocate the savings to the alternate, because we don't have funding for that right now versus we do have funding for the construction, so they could throw themselves out of the equation if they overstate the base bid, right?
They could.
I get it's
It's,
Okay.
tossing in
don't
there.
try to think about alternate logic,
Yeah.
because it,
All right,
So are we gonna get, if we get the 12 DCs, we keep the one out that we think's gonna be out, they're gonna give us 4 bids if we combine 1 and 2?
they're gonna give you a base bid and 3 alternates.
Price 3
So
alternates.
They
four-
price 3
four
alternates, and then when we do the bid tab together, we'll show you who the winner is with base,
At
base
each
plus
level.
1, base plus 2, base plus 3. So you'll see what all those are and what that total value is, because it may even change between, you've got 4 different bid prices. You may have 4 different winners, depending on how they price it.
Jason, why'd you pick Monday instead of the previous Friday to have them in?
I was trying to give them, I don't know how many days you guys need for
We'll
reply.
talk about the schedule.
Okay, we'll talk,
Let's just try to.
we'll have them
decide
by
the-
town, we'll have them by Monday, right?
What's that?
Are you-
He wants the bids by
Yes.
I think,
Monday for town meeting.
No, I know,
but
he
we don't
wants them,
have to
but if
be-
you don't get him in at 5 o'clock Monday, we have time to get
Well,
him.
we haven't talked about electronic bidding yet.
That's why I want to talk
Yeah.
about the schedule after we resolve the alternate stuff, because that's another discussion.
All
to
right.
have.
We got to order the
okay,
alternates.
so I'm going to make a motion that we direct our design team to proceed as follows on the add alternates. Alternate number 1 is going to be the parking lot and retaining wall. Alternate number 2 is going to be the golf clubhouse construction items. And alternate number 3 will be a police parking cruiser canopy. Police cruiser canopy, there we go. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Wood. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? I got 2 opposed. Any abstaining? Can we ask why?
I don't agree with the process in terms of these being ad alternates, just from my statements from a year and a half
Okay.
ago.
I agree with Mr. Rooney's comments, but for the complete opposite reason. I think we are here, and a decision been made by the town meeting for a public safety building. I spent many a Saturday at the dump talking to everybody, and we talked about golf courses, and I urged the people to put something on town meeting so we could get some kind of formal decision on that. I would agree they supported us, but formally, there has not been any decision on this. And we've got money to build a public safety building. Bond council has told us that's what the money's for, we can use it. But yet, we keep bringing up costs associated with the golf course that hasn't even been determined by town meeting yet, whether that's gonna go for. And I mean, I hope it does go, it has my blessing, but here we have hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're dealing with that we haven't even been told it's gonna go for. We haven't been given the money for it, and we're having these gentlemen, address it. And that decision has not been made. So I don't wanna have anything to do with that until that decision is made.
Well, I couldn't disagree with you, Peter, in any stronger terms, and I think you know this. Having been the forefront of the negotiation for town meeting for this article, I can tell you categorically that there would be no funding for the police building or the fire building, but for the continued operation of the golf course. In other words, they are inevitably and forever will they be linked. So if people may not have been voting with that expectation, they may have been thinking exactly what you're thinking. Listen, this is just money just for the police station, good luck golf course, see how you make out. But I gotta tell you, based upon the hundreds, perhaps thousands of people that I spoke to, these things were intertwined, and it was not a cause and effect. It's not if A, then B. They were both together. So I disagree with you that I think that the mindset, the intent, if you will, of town meeting was to do both of these projects for the funded amount.
But there was no money funded for it, and there was no vote
You're
saying that that's
right,
the
in
case.
terms of formal.
So, I mean, we have to deal with facts. We can't deal with speculation. of
I'm
what
not
people were thinking.
speculating. I don't think I'm speculating at all. I think that's the reality of it. That's the reality. I agree with you that the way that the article was written, it was for the construction of the public safety building. No question. What I am saying is that that article, you would not have even put pen to paper on that article unless there was the corresponding understanding that the golf course would continue in its operation.
And therefore, the article should pay for what has to be done to minimally keep it going, and I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Totally with you. I still think, I don't know how the question got answered, but I still think if bond council had been understood, we wanted that to see if they could, that we might have gotten different answers. So I'm with you on that, but as you said before, I think that cart's gone, so.
Yep.
But I
Okay.
totally agree with you.
All right. Next item is authorization to proceed to bid. I'm not sure there's any further discussion on that, other than formally authorizing you guys to go out and solicit bids.
Yep.
Do you need any motions on that? I guess I have it on my, my agenda as will vote, so we're gonna make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to authorize, the owner's project manager in conjunction with the design team, to proceed to bid the public safety, building project as presented, to us to date. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Wood. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Radio communication update. So I'd like to keep this short. I think the committee, well, we didn't take a formal motion, voiced an opinion that this is a 10-year decision, not a 50-year decision. I don't think any of us were appointed to tell the chiefs how to operate their department, but given that the funding is coming out of our budget, it is within the purview of this committee. So what Mr. Lemieux has done, working with the consultant that he referenced the last meeting, is compared two different systems, worked with the chiefs to gain a consensus. So to the extent that anyone has questions, you're more than welcome to ask questions, but in my view, I think that the motion is very simple to support whatever decision the chiefs make and to just bring the decision back to us, once you have the state bid list. But I'm not sure that our committee should be telling them what vendors to use. I think some of us have more experience than others with radios, but that's just my view. Like, certainly can be overruled, but I guess I'll leave it up to the committee what they would like from either John, based on the presentation that was in your packet, or the chiefs, any questions you have for them on the operations of the department, but that's how I'll open it.
Is there a clear consensus as to which way this should go?
Motorola.
Okay.
I think that the biggest difference, would both systems do what they trying to do? Yes. I think if you look, at the slides, there's some major components. Each system is set up to do essentially the same thing. You've got the console, you've got the gateway to your radios, which is made up of all these different consolettes, which gives you all of the different frequencies. A package for, Baypern, Boston Area Police Emergency Radio Network, for the fire district, for local police, for local fire. Both are doing all that. There's a back-end site controller, which is basically a big server. It's all connected via a network. The biggest difference is that Allcom's a reseller, Motorola's a manufacturer. And all of the pieces that you get from Motorola are all Motorola, and they all work together. Allcom, it's all different. Even in the dispatch console, the screen is made by someone different than the computer. So a lot of pieces, not that they couldn't serve you the same way, but the reality is as the system gets older and things start falling out of warranty, you're paying Allcom every time they come out. I know there was some concern over price the first time. We had basically a $213,000 number versus a $325,000 number. Those numbers have come back closer to each other, as I showed you. Basically, the Motorola number was priced, the vendor finally acknowledged that he was trying to price this out 16, 18 months when we were going to buy it. We were like, no, Allcom gave us a number that was going to be good really to the end of next month. Give us a number that's good for 2 months. And he came back with a number. And also buried in that number is a cost for 24/7 service for the first year. To me, that's an added service. Took that out too. Now we're $60,000 off the number, and instead of 120 that we were the first time we presented this. So, Chiefs, I don't know if you have any any other feedback or thoughts. At this point, I think everybody felt pretty good with the Motorola, going with them. And again, this isn't the buy price. This is, we've asked these folks to do this work, not committing to give them the business yet. So, that's part of the back and forth. So, we've got the state bid list, and then ultimately, we can either go to one and beat them up a little bit, or we could go to two and do kind of send us your bids. The
So
reality
you
is,
can
though,
actually negotiate.
you actually can on the state bid list.
It works pretty well.
It works pretty,
Yeah.
touche.
They
But
have
yes,
sales too. They have like a spring sale, Motorola.
Do
Oh,
that?
No,
That's awesome.
that's true, and you've given them other business in the town doing other things too, so this is the time to kind of,
Okay, I guess I have one other question, if I may.
sure,
I see on here that the pricing does not include any upgrades to the existing repeater infrastructure.
Mhm.
Do we have to care about the repeater infrastructure? Is that on our list of things to worry about?
no, because you wouldn't be able to pay for it anyway out of the job right now, because it's not in the building
Peters
itself.
wouldn't be on site.
I mean, I say it's an issue and it's important, but we can't help it anyway.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
You can deal with the stuff, the hardware that's going in the building and on the building.
But, so, John, Jeff, this isn't going in our building bids, this isn't going in your documents, it's going in our project cost.
That's correct. So you see the numbers in front of you. We have 3 line items that total $345,000,
Which are the three?
which the three are the $150,000 on item 7, communication tower, the $45,000 on item 13, design of the communications tower, and then the $150,000 on line 20, dispatch equipment. So obviously, any savings that we have between the numbers that are being quoted and that, we still haven't priced the dispatch furniture, which is in there. They're expensive desks and chairs that all of this equipment ties onto.
And that's not in base bid.
That's not in base,
That'd be part of furniture and fixture, in my
It's-
opinion.
So are we not doing a tower?
we're not doing a tower.
We'd
'Cause-
still
'cause
be
we
a
won't need-
planning and zone of appeals if we were.
Don't mention the T word ever again.
Okay. I won't.
Any other,
You're carrying us 345 in the,
345 against 276 right now. So
covers
basically-
everything that you're carrying.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And basically, we would then, why this decision is important is although we've been able to get the electrical engineer, GGD, I gave him all of the info that both of these firms gave us. We still need to finalize that.
Right.
Now that he knows we're going Motorola, he knows a little bit more about the specifics and what he needs to finalize and build in. So that's all it's important about it now. We won't buy this for probably 6 months. So, the actual radio.
Communication, right.
This is probably 6 months to manufacture, and then they'll come in as, there'll be a lot of coordination as we get near the end to get the new system up and running before we shut the switch off in the existing stations and roll it into the new building. We want to make sure it's up and running before they move.
are there any other questions on radios? Okay. Move on to project budget update. So just very quickly, I know we've talked a lot of numbers tonight. The 2 items that Mr. Lemieux handed out before the meeting in terms of this 11 by 17 piece of paper, which we're probably going to collapse some columns once we go out to bid, and the actual expense summary. These are going to become static parts of our agendas going forward, just so there's visibility, and I think that's where we're going to be spending a lot of our time,
Correct.
right? And contractor issues, et cetera, going forward.
Correct. So just to quick point, when we look at the expenditure page, to some of your comments about some of these other things, site plan review, I've got, 3 bills there that came across, Precision Data Industries, both of which were for car counts, and PAR, which was for a piece of the site plan review as well. I don't have a line item for that specifically, so we can, you don't need to answer tonight, but we can talk later about, do we want a separate line item for those items and just take the money from another line item, or right now, if you look on the budget, I've got it, I'm just showing it as a committed cost in the construction contingency line item, just as a placeholder for now. So don't need to answer that, but as time goes on, we will have some other things that will be coming on this, and that's why it's good to show it. I'll categorize it as best I think, but we can always change that. To me, the most important number here is what you've spent, you know, putting it in the right bucket. At the end of the day, it's one giant bucket. We just want to make sure the line items help us from going over budget. But ultimately, it is all one pool of money.
I think what would be helpful is, right, we have a total amount here today.
Mhm.
We approved a certain batch, right, so the number should jump by that between meetings.
Correct.
Unless we're meeting within 2 days and they haven't had a chance to cut the checks, right? Because I think one of the items I'm cognizant of that I just need you to continue to have a process with Mr. Purple and the town accountant is, right, we approve the invoices, but then don't want them to sit there, potentially accrue interest, late fees, et cetera. So, you know, we may have to have certain meetings in the meantime between now and bid day just to do some administrative tasks, but.
Well, right, and you know, as an example, you know, Jeff's next invoice came in this afternoon, I received it. So, you know.
You don't want us sitting on that for 2 months?
Prefer not, no.
That's a big one.
Gotta pay some other people to do work.
And I just think, just for the committee's benefit, when John sends this to me, I kind of do my own little reconciliation, and, like, there's been things on here that we've found that just were not properly coded. So I think there's a bunch of checks and balances, but I think all of us kind of own this sheet going forward in terms of making sure, I don't remember who this is, what does that relate to?
Right.
Any questions, comments on this? You're more than welcome offline to send any feedback to John.
Yep.
Just don't copy the entire committee. And,
Jason, did you want to follow on?
no, I don't, unless someone, John's just asking me if we wanted to vote anything on the radio. I don't foresee any need, but if anyone else in the committee wants to vote anything. All right. So we have, made it to almost the end of the agenda. So project schedule. So in your packet, was presented a schedule. I think, Jeff, you know where we want to head, so I'll.
Yeah, so take the first page and rip it off, throw it away. It's all, everything we've already done. Page 2 is really where we are now. It's the, you know, we're after the planning board hearing, we're having our building committee meeting on the 12th of February. We're underway with pre-qual, presented you the cost estimate, got the approval to proceed to bid. So we're going to be having a joint meeting with the golf club committee, and if I heard you right, Jason, that's next Tuesday.
2:20, yep,
Yep.
7 PM.
So that's now got a date on it. And then we are planning to release the project for bid on the 20th of February, which I believe is a Wednesday. Just so you all know, there's what's called the Central Register, which the project has to be advertised on. The advertisement has to be in by the Thursday prior to when you want it to appear. It always appears on a Wednesday every week. So that's why we time our drawings to be available on the same Wednesday. We would expect to have a period of time before we are collecting filed subbids. Currently, we've scheduled that for the 29th of March, and then the general contractor bids due approximately 2 weeks after that. I believe they're both Thursday dates, which are good dates to get bids back. Then between that date and when the building committee reviews the bids, we are hopeful that we would be able to have time to check the bid results. In this case, since we did pre-qualification, the theory is we've already checked everybody, and, you know, there shouldn't be any long duration of time that would need to be had, because we've already seen everybody's qualifications. Then we would need a meeting to review them with you and sort of essentially get a direction as to how to proceed. And then we expect sometime after that, we didn't put any dates on it, but theoretically in May, the contract would be signed, notice to proceed to the contractor would be given, and we'd start phase 1. Like I said earlier, we had planned to start phase 2, August 15th or thereabouts. We'll pick a date. It'll be in the project manual. The contractor will have to abide by that date. There will be liquidated damages if it doesn't happen. And then we expect the building would have substantial completion by June of 2019. And then there'd be some punch list work going on at that point, but substantial completion means that the departments can move in and operate out of the building. It's substantially complete for them to occupy. They'd have a certificate of occupancy and it would be in operation. So that's the schedule as we drafted it. And I know, Jason, you wanted to make some modifications to that. And John, did you get those dates too as well? Because I heard you say something about a 5-week bid period. I just want to make sure the dates align with your
Oh, no,
expectations.
you've got 6 in here
4
right now.
weeks.
Yeah, so that's what I thought. It looks like I think we have 6, which is typically what we would normally recommend is a 6-week bid period. We've done 5 weeks before with 3 on the filed sub bid, 2 on the GC. So that's okay too. But 5 is probably as low as I'd want to go.
Do this work. By here, by there.
So
That's 14 months.
that Monday of the week of April 12th, which is April 9th, is the magic date for purposes of town meeting.
Yep.
And then the Board of Selectmen are currently scheduled to meet on Tuesday, April 17th, which is school vacation week. So theoretically, if you got your bids back on the 9th, we'd have town meeting results no later than probably Wednesday on the alternates, which would then give you 6 days to check your references and then have a building committee meeting to decide what to present. I mean, I think it's a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. I mean, we really,
Well, if the 9th is the critical date, here's a scenario, and John, you may want this anyways. What if we just plan to get them on the 4th of April, which would be the 5-week time period that John stated? It would give us a little bit of cushion before the 9th.
In case we have to push
There's
it a
always
couple.
an issue, sometimes in bidding, where an addenda has to be, because there was something that we had to correct at the last minute. You need 48 hours between the addenda and when bids are received. And if it goes out in between that period, for whatever reason, we have to push it out, we may want to delay the bid a day or something like that. So there's always the possibility the bid dates get moved around just a little bit. So having a couple of day cushion would be helpful.
so assuming you came in on the 4th with the bids, and even if it slipped to, let's say, the 6th, then what sort of turnaround time do you need for the checks? And I think the one thing that, just for the committee's benefit, that I heard earlier was electronic bidding. So there's not going to be volumes of paper coming in?
I don't
Is
know.
that what my understanding
We
is?
haven't talked about this yet.
No, 2 of us haven't talked about it. I'm all in favor of electronic bidding.
Yeah,
but-
so basically, if anybody saw, I should have taken a picture, what this place looked like when the pre-qualifications came in, it will be somewhat, picture 115 envelopes coming in, all needing to be opened, okay? It's long. Publicly, one at a time, people sitting and waiting.
Posted and everything.
I got a quote from Bid Docs Online, which is a firm we have used a lot lately. The Attorney General has deemed electronic bidding as acceptable. Basically, what happens is all of these bidders will be told in the specs that it's electronic bidding, no paper bids will be accepted. They will sign up and file their electronic signature with Bid Docs. They will submit their bids. Because they can submit their bids early, basically, Bid Docs starts opening them, okay, and populates a spreadsheet.
Internal. Nobody else can
Internally,
see it.
nobody else sees it, internal. So if the bids are due, filed sub bids are due at 2 o'clock on the 22nd, at about 2:10, we get a populated spreadsheet with all 100 sub bids on it, broken out by section, with a button to click and view any bid that we want to see. Then we just approve them, and once they're approved and made official, they then send all those results to the GCs, who use them to put their bids together. They charge roughly $450 for hosting and roughly $550 for the bidding, so it's about $1,000. Why the face?
That doesn't seem nearly enough.
Yeah, Dave, well,
Sign them up.
no, listen, so, you you won't be paying me for the time to sit here, the hours to do the bid opening. So, no, it was, both of us, we won't be here. But
Time and materials, John.
Looking for a credit.
I hear you.
Negotiated that one.
So it sounds like we make some money here.
Would you stop? Just let me finish. The other thing is hosting it electronically as opposed to on paper. Many firms now do their takeoffs electronically, okay? So your bid documents, which would typically run $5,000 to $6,000 to $7,000 on a job of this size. Think of all the costs we just saw from HSH. Picture every sub and GC getting printed, all of those documents. You pay for that. Nobody covers that cost. By doing it through an electronic hosting company, half the people will do this takeoffs online. They'll never even print the drawings. Any drawings that are bought, bid docs will take them back and give them back to us at the end. Again, you're paying for what's been produced, but the GC is always looking for copies at the end. We're looking for copies. You and the town are looking for copies. You know, they end up getting used. Bid docs basically assumes that about half of your printing bill goes away with doing an electronic hosting. I would agree. It's rare for us to do a job where we don't at least electronically host now, and electronic bidding is finding more and more favor.
Yeah, I don't think we've done a job in the last 2 years that hasn't gone electronic, either hosting, document hosting, or electronic bidding, and most of them are doing electronic bidding, just because of the cost savings.
Let me ask this, will we lose any bidders? Do all the bidders out there
Now, all the
know how to
bidders
do
that
this?
we have pre-qualified should be able to do this.
Okay.
And they will talk them through if, you know, there's instructions of who to talk to. You know, it's basically, they do their whole bid on paper, and it's really ultimately scanning it and emailing it. There's no portal, they're not entering it. They literally do the same process, but they send it electronically, and by doing their certification beforehand about their signature, it's all barcoded and time-stamped. It's pretty slick.
I don't
And-
think anyone needs any more of a sales pitch on the electronic.
I don't make anything from this.
So-
It's so much easier.
So in terms of the original question, yes, there's very little turnaround time between when we get the results, we review them.
Right, and
authorize it.
furthermore, DCAM, which typically if we didn't do pre-qualification, we wouldn't have seen all of this information from the subs and GCs. We will still want to check the DCAM file on the 2 or 3 bidders, low GC bidders. They are now, after years of having to go and visit them, they will now email those documents to us. So that turnaround time, which used to take a couple of weeks, not because it takes 2 weeks to look at it, because it took 2 weeks for them to
Get an
actually give
appointment.
us access to get an appointment. All I need now is a letter from Mark, which we'll have ready to go once the bids come in, identifying who they are. It's just an email from the, town official saying, give access to Vertex for the following GCs. We get the stuff mailed to us, we compare it against the files that we have already, make sure nothing's changed, make sure they didn't get a bad report card from now until we bid this, 8 weeks from now when those bids come in. So it's from people who,
They're currently
people for whom
working
they
with.
did work for. So let's say they finished a job in Westboro in the next 2 weeks and they were terrible. It's not in that paperwork yet, okay? But we get a chance to see anything new that's been uploaded and check the scores. So if there's a concern, that's our chance before we come to you and say, okay, we've reviewed it, we recommend you enter into a contract with ABC Builders for the low bid.
So, when do you want, so if you get bids back on the 4th, so it sounds like that's solid?
It's
plus
solid,
or mi-
yeah, it's solid,
Plus
but,
potentially 2 days?
yeah, but don't take those 2 days from us. We'll
Right.
keep those 2 days as float.
Then do you want a week for DCAM? Do you want a week and a half? Because I'm weary of having a quorum of the Board of Selectmen potentially delay this, right? I want to try to give them, we have no authority.
No, but if you have a Board of Selectmen meeting scheduled on the 17th,
Should be plenty of time.
that's plenty of time. That's a full
We-
week
well,
plus a day.
We'd be ready sooner in case they don't want to meet the week of school vacation. I just want to get it on the table with them that they know when we're coming.
Yeah, I'd feel more comfortable, I mean, if it has to be a Tuesday, then I'd feel more comfortable betting
I don't
on
think
the
it has to
17th.
be any day, given,
But if the board
Yeah,
wants
April-
to meet the 12th or something like that, then I'd say you'd have plenty
do
of
the
time to
12th.
get it done before then.
I'd offer it on the 17th first, but then we could always back it up to the 12th.
as early as the 12th.
Yeah, but that's assuming the bid goes on the 4th. If the bid has to get pushed to the 6th,
Yeah.
now you're giving us 3 business days, because the 6th is a Friday, you're not getting anything from anybody on a Friday afternoon. That only gives us 3 days during the week. It's not, it's doable, but everything has to fall into place.
I guess history tells us if they're not gonna meet on a Tuesday and they needed to do this, they would do a Friday morning administrative meeting, so it would be on Friday the 13th.
Dun,
in the
dun,
morning.
dun. Yeah, fine. That you just,
Okay.
a day is a day.
Okay.
It's a lot of stuff to, put in
All
in a
right.
row for
I'll just say
18
for the
million bucks.
17th, because they obviously won't meet the day before
Okay,
on Patriots' Day, so we'll plan on the 17th, because I think DPW is also gonna come with the water line for our project. They're gonna have a bid package by then too for the same, so it'd be nice to kind of get those two done. Now, I guess prior building committees that you've worked with, we'll obviously post and be there, but I'm not sure there's a heck of a lot of decisions for us to make before walking in with the Board of Selectmen, other than any consensus on the ad alternates. But I would think the Board of Selectmen are just gonna defer to what town meeting decided 3 days before in terms of funding those. Am I,
Yeah, that's typically, it's a recommendation from the committee.
but we're not gonna really have a choice in a recommendation, right?
Well, I guess it's sort of a formal recommendation of,
Okay.
yeah, do you?
The low
The
bidder.
low
It's more
bidder.
a question, do you need it? Do you need to make a recommendation to them?
Okay.
The bids are gonna be what they are.
The data's the data at that point.
Actually, you could reject a little bit, right?
there's always the potential of something possible like that, but given what we've done, the prequal, it's unlikely.
Yeah, we know the players, the references are coming back.
I mean, I'd rather get it set up. If something falls through the cracks, like you get a bad decam the week
So,
before and you need to vet
as
that
long as
out.
you'll-
I'd say that the reality is, probably the biggest fly in the ointment is the price. If the price comes in high, then there might be a little bit of decision-making process that has to happen about, depending on what that number is, what happens to the budget, how do we come back to you to tell you how we do the project still? And there's some more decision-making factors there, but,
But we can,
normal factors are pretty simple. I don't think it's gonna be an issue.
but you'll know when, let's just say the 4th or the 6th,
That's
whether
right.
you have a price issue.
Yep.
Because you'll just be reference checking for a week.
Right.
So theoretically, we could meet
Yep.
that following week
The numbers have already been in.
and deal with it if we had to.
Yep.
Mike?
And there's nothing stopping release of the documents on the 28th. There's nothing, there's no hangup on, we have to put it out the bid again. You're already doing that with the elevator.
Yeah, because
We-
even if the
we
elevator
don't have to do
holds
any
us-
more
Even if
weeks.
the elevator holds us up, we'll
just go out.
tell them what to do, and it will work. I mean, having 5 weeks is that even if we,
To bid, 5 weeks from documents
yeah,
to
no,
bid.
we will, no, we'll have enough time to know, and even if the elevator wasn't ready when the bids go out, we could do a shorter bid period just for the elevator and hopefully have them sync up at the end, So it's,
But that's what I'm saying, I guess that's what I'm asking. We don't have to build in any more 2 weeks to release any more bids to get more files,
No.
because we got enough
no,
of everybody.
and there was no risk, from what we saw coming through, we're well over the 3 minimum for every category right now, so we're covered. We're covered. So all I would say is just leave the date of where, let us have a conversation about where the filed sub-bid date's going to be, because if we're shrinking the bid period a few days,
That's a,
yeah, we'll work out
Yeah.
which guy it's better to take it away from and, what that date is. And again, where there's no physical bid opening here, you're just all gonna get a spreadsheet, with the bid results.
But
Mr.
the-
Rooney?
I assume the GCs know how much town meeting is allocated for this project?
If they're smart.
Mike? Or no, maybe not, I don't know. Maybe you don't want the mic.
Well, also too, we have to tell them what the ballpark is for the job.
You do?
We do. It's part of the advertising requirement.
Yeah.
So you don't wanna waste somebody's time, a small guy who can only do a $3 million job.
And they already
by
know.
not- By not
We already
telling
told
them.
In the
The
prequal
prequel.
Yeah,
package.
we told them.
What did you tell them?
It was
17.
17?
Ballpark.
All right. So we know our end goal. Defer to your judgment on the interim goals. Scheduling future meetings. We're gonna meet next Tuesday, and then my anticipation, barring anything else, is we meet again somewhere in and around between April 6th and April 17th, depending on how the exact timing falls. unless we need to have a quick administrative item because 5 invoices show up that we need to approve, but, that's the extent
You get an
of-
invoice from us every month, so.
all right, so maybe we'll do a quick administrative meeting, but I don't know that we need to do any of that. I will be approaching the Board of Selectmen. I think we have some to-dos for them, that makes them aware of, so, to the extent that they post a meeting, I'll post a meeting for us. That's the only other thing I can foresee. And then the only other thing under other business that just I want everyone to be aware of is, I've asked Mark to link up John with, town council to start drafting the contract, so that once it actually is awarded, we're not sitting here trying to figure out the wording, so that they kind of have something ready to go, because I think that could slow us down if, in terms of when we go shovels in the ground, if we're not ready for that. So I think now that John has spent his weekend doing 700 references, he'll,
The deal with you want the agreement in the bid documents. There is no negotiation. They sign the agreement that's there. That's the
there you
plan.
go, there's your negotiation, John.
So you guys have to draft it and have it, that's, okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
council looks at it and goes through it. So I'll be in touch with them. We'll find a form of agreement that everybody agrees to that works, that's worked in the past on prior jobs, and we'll go with that.
Is there any other business anyone wants to conduct this evening?
Do you need to vote on the electronic bidding? No? Good. Leave it at that.
Not in my opinion.
That's your job, right? That's your work.
Well, good.
That falls under the auto.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Seconded by Mr. Wood. Any further? Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.